Welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
Thank you for joining us today as we cover chapters 57 through 60 of Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. And you know, when we started this podcast, Nicole, I never imagined I would be saying this, but we are giving away free sex toys. Our friends at Bellesa are literally sending free vibrators and gift cards for vibrators to everyone who signs up for our giveaway.
And we're so excited because Bellesa aligns so much with the Fantasy Fangirls values that we have created for this show. Bellesa is a bi-women company for all things sexual wellness, and their mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. Sounds a lot like the smut love letters on this podcast.
And they were so kind to send us some goodies. And I have to say, my personal favorite was the demi wand, partly because you all know me and my wands. It comes in this really cute charging station, so it can be stored discreetly when not in use. Shh. And it works for all body types because, hey, newsflash, orgasms are for everyone. It has a flexible neck that allows you to get just the right angle and pressure that you're after. And best of all, there's no annoying pattern modes, you know, because if you know, you know.
That is so real.
I know.
So for me, my favorite is the Thump. I love the name for it too. It is truly a toy that does it all because it not only vibrates down here, it also suctions up here. And yes, you guessed it, it thumps right here. It utilizes Bellesa's improved pleasure jet technology, and the True Feel vibrations naturally complement the suction at its targeted base. I also love that it's waterproof. It is also USB rechargeable, and it's made from premium quality silicone.
So again, Bellesa is giving every single one of you who signs up for our giveaway either a free sex toy or a gift card. Just follow the link in the description below. And before we begin this deep dive, you know the drill. Please listen closely to our content warning. Most importantly, we have spoilers for all of Iron Flame. We may be focusing on chapters 57 through 60 today, but we are bringing the whole book into the conversation. That means everything from Iron Flame, Fourth Wing, and anything else that Rebecca Yarros has said, it's all on the table.
So if you don't know why the Wyvern are singing Evanescence's "Wake Me Up Inside," then please go read the book, and we will be here when you're done.
Next up, this podcast is rated R, folks. We of Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things with adult words about an adult book.
If you don't know, We're About to Die sex is the best kind of sex. However, it's made ultimately worse when your older brother interrupts you. So with that in mind, please be mindful of little listening ears.
One more quick reminder. We are launching our monthly newsletter this week. I know this has been a long time coming. There's been a lot going on in the back end, but we are so excited. It is finally launching this week.
So if you want the podcast calendar for February, if you want a roundup of fantasy books to read from authors in this community, if you need to know Lexi or I's current obsessions, or if you want to support featured bookish small businesses, please subscribe using the link in our show notes or the YouTube captions.
Last thing before we jump into our Iron Flame episode 11.
If you love Fantasy Fangirls and you want to support us in making this dream our livelihood, if you want more content, more community connection, discounts on merch, early access to episodes, and more, please check out our Patreon. We have 2 membership tiers, Cadets and Dragon Riders.
The link is in the show notes or YouTube captions, and really and truly, thank you so much for helping us bring these episodes to you.
And now, it is time to prepare for war.
Dun, dun, dun. Let's begin this episode deep dive with Battle Brief, aka Nicole's summary of what happens in chapters 57 through 60 of Iron Flame. I do not envy you with this stretch of chapters, Nicole.
I needed some wine assistance last night to write these, let me tell you. Chapter 57. Arriving at Athpine, readying for the world's most awkward company meeting, Xaden confronts Violet about not coming to bed last night. She might have been avoiding her intrinsic boyfriend, but the cover of "I was trying to save Tyrandor" works very well. As a Navarian enemy approaches the clearing, Violet promises Xaden that, "Yes, honey, we will talk later." In walks 7 of the Navarians' highest leadership, including General Melgren and General Sorengale. And shock of shocks, she's still being so cold to her daughters that basically penguins could have walked through this meeting no problem. General Melgren starts the meeting offering the Oration Riders to go to the original meeting location where they have refreshments that are most definitely poisoned. Way to get some trust there, General Melgren. But an impatient convocation assembly is ready to get the show on the road. After some posturing, Ulysses, who is in charge, I guess, is ready to roll out. But Melgren drops the real reason for this desperate meeting. Because of his signet of seeing the future outcomes of battle, he learned that the Venin are going to overrun Navarre at Samara on the winter solstice. He asks for their aid, and in return, King Tauri has agreed to let them secede and become their own kingdom. Violet's like, sweet deal, let's shake hands and be happy. But in the most allow me to mic drop way, Brennan walks into the meeting and says hell no to Melgren. Lilith, for once in her life, is shocked to see her very alive firstborn, and let's be honest, her favorite child, walk in and out of this meeting. The meeting disperses with the conclusion that Navarre is fucked and off to their deaths, but Lilith gets a moment with her daughters. She uses this time to get some answers about Brennan and to give Violet Lyra's journal. Yes, the journal that she was tortured for having. And fuck, it's in Moranian, the dead language that Violet does not speak. Lilith also mentions that, hey, those wards that you'd have that don't work, you should cut open the dead wyvern, scattering your borders like a tauntaun from Star Wars and see what's inside. On their way back to Erasia, Violet and Mira do just that. And what do they find but an onyx rune that, when they're holding, basically starts the Staying Alive theme song, and wyvern twitch back to life. But Violet fries them. Phew! Chapter 58. A week later, Xaden and Violet finally get some time alone in the sparring gym to talk/fight out their feelings. There's that healthy communication that we love with these two. They come to the agreement that no matter what, Xaden will not use his second signet on Violet, and also no matter what, they will always try to figure out whatever comes their way. Swoon! But boy, oh boy, is that about to be put to the test at the end of this book. Later in Battle Brief, it's 2 days before solstice, and we learn that the Venin have vacated the southern part of the continent and congregated along the northern border. Violet, using her brilliant fucking woman status to her full ability, realizes that they are Netflix and chilling at the border, waiting for something. Dun dun dun! In this panic, she runs out of Battle Brief with her squad tailing her, and she finds Xaden. She tells him that the Venin are waiting for the wards to fall before attacking all of Navarre in the hopes of getting to the Vale. General Melgren's Samara battle was just a distraction to the real war, which is going to occur at Besgaeth War College. Chapter 59. Packing up for their 18-hour flight, the lines are drawn at who's able to come and who isn't. Who is? Basically every second and third year who's able to make it. Who can't/isn't is the angry first years, unable to wield flyers, and spiteful older brothers. 18 hours later, our core crew lands at Besgaeth to a very empty Besgaeth ? So little to say that arriving at the school was easy. So easy that Lilith basically told them to open the front door so the dragons did not have to make any more dramatic entrances. But her kindness stops there. She completely gaslights her daughter, basically saying that, oh, it's cute that you think our wards are in danger. Give it 5 minutes, Lilith. But Dane, fucking Dane, convinces Lilith to allow them to see the wards. Low below Besgaeth, we walk to the ward chamber and immediately know something's wrong. I guess it was the dead guards that tipped them off, but it's probably the giant orange dragon that really sealed the deal. And who is riding that orange dragon but Jack fucking Barlow? Only good can come from this. Jack goes full-blown Elmo fire meme and murders his own dragon, spilling her blood on the wardstone, extinguishing the black flame atop it, and letting her body fall, crumbling the stone in her demise. Jack fucking Barlow destroyed the Navarrian wards. Dun dun dun. Chapter 60. But Jack's not dying despite his dragon being dead. Xaden uses Jack's absolute chaos energy to gain information from him, and we learn that Jack fucking Barlow has turned Venin, and Nolan has been trying to mend him all year. Well, fuck, that explains a lot. Jack channels from the earth just in time to injure Dane and have Xaden knock Jack out as a result. But we know one thing for certain. The Venin, they are on their way. An hour later in Battle Brief, we're preparing for war. Lilith assigns squads to certain sectors to defend the school from the air, while infantry are defending from the ground. RIP to the entire infantry quadrant who's about to die, in the hopes that they can wait it out for General Melgen's ass to get back from Samara. With the imminent danger on the horizon, Lilith tells them all to go sleepy bye. Sure, because I can totally fall asleep after this imminent doom news. Early the next morning, Xaden and Violet are enjoying their final moments together. And I mean enjoying their final moments together. But because these two can never catch a fucking break in a Besgaeth bedroom, a pounding, nice, on the door cock blocks them. And who is it but the entirety of Second Squad? First years and flyers alike. And a guilty-looking Brennan. Lilith, sniffing out the flyers like a bloodhound, though, is about to raise some hell until she sees her son. Seizing the opportunity, re-asks General Sorengale permission to have Second Squad Flame Section 4th Wing Sector be moved to right above the Wardstone Chamber. Shockingly, and probably only 10% aware of what she's actually agreeing to, Lilith nods. it's time for war.
Woo! You know, we may be covering less pages in these final episodes, but that's because they are extremely jam-packed. So let's waste no time and dive right in, don our Signet Power to discuss key insights, analysis, foreshadowing, and theories.
Of course, we have to kick it off with the lead up to this company-wide meeting. Lines like this make me very nervous for book 3. As Violet is seeing Xaden dismount from Sigale, she thinks about how this is another moment that she's finding out that Xaden has held important information from her. She says, quote, "I'm just not sure how many this times I have in me, no matter how much I love him." We have a big old this time, capital italics, bold underline at the end of this book. So I have a question for you, Lex. Do you think that this is going to be what breaks them up and we're going to have a little break in book 3 because of the Venin quote this time? Or do you think that this is going to be another thing that they work through and quote unquote fight it out?
I don't think that Violet will be the one to break things off. In the previous set of chapters, she emphasized that her love is not fickle. And I would say that is a little bit more foreshadowing, even though she's still very frustrated with everything going on and just still processing everything. If anything, I think it actually might be Xaden who wants to be morally good and maybe distance himself from her so he can try to find the cure, or trying to be a little bit noble and not put her in any more danger from him. So I know that at the very end of the book, one of the things that you were worried about is that he is kind of gearing up to leave, sneak away in the middle of the night when he actually does go down to Jack. I would not be surprised if he does try to do a whole "I need to leave to protect you" sort of thing there. Of course, it wouldn't be to completely break up with her, but it would be "I'm doing this for your own good, for our own good, for our safety and for our future." And I could see that more than anything frustrating her, because it's almost like he's leaving her when they should be doing this together. If I had to speculate anything, that would be it.
I'm very much in the same boat as you. The big thing that I'm thinking of is I think it's going to entirely depend on how Xaden handles the first few days as a Venin after their night that they spent together, where they were probably just both so exhausted from battling like for hours and hours on end. And I'm going to be curious with that first sit down of like, okay, it's time to talk about what you did. I'm really going to be curious as to what that conversation is going to go like. And I think that will determine what's going to happen between these two and their relationship in book 3. Do I think that this is some major conflict that they're going to have to work through? Yes. I don't think I want a situation where they break up. I really don't want a situation. And by the way, when I say break up, they're going to get back together. They are in game. They're in game. We know that. But I worry about what you're saying here, Lex, with his like, let me be noble. Because I hate that trope. It's just so blasé, in my opinion. It's so like, let me be morally good and da-da-da. It feels very Edward Cullen to me, and I'm just not about that.
You know, I'm thinking right now, I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen, and then we got some Xaden POV chapters where he's off doing his own thing, and then we get the Violet POV chapters separately, and we might get like almost like a tandem timeline there.
That might be the only way that I'm okay with this, rather than him just like piecing out for half of the book. Like, because that would be just like, no, like I would be so sad. But I want to pull back to this quote that I just mentioned with the, "I'm not sure how many this times I have in me, no matter how much I love him," because that's also such a relatable line. Yes. It shows how much Violet has grown up, really, like, because there are moments, I know for me personally, there are people that I have loved in the past, but the quote unquote this times kept adding up to the point where I needed to leave. And thank fucking God I did. But obviously I don't want them to break up. But just like Rebecca Yarros said, quote, "You want some conflict? Here's some conflict." And I feel like we're about to see that big time in book 3.
I wholeheartedly agree. And when I think about conflict, yes, I think that Violet will definitely be angry at him. Also, the reason that he turned is because he, in so many ways, didn't trust that she would take care of things. And of course, in the heat of the moment, all of that, like neither one of them were wrong in, well, I don't know if Xaden should have gone quite that far, but in the moment, it felt like it was his only option for him. And I can absolutely see his perspective on that. And I could see Violet being the way that she is, being very angry that he didn't trust her to handle things herself, even if it was all a big shit show.
Yeah, literally.
Like, I don't know how else to say it, yeah.
Moving forward with this pre-meeting scene, my heart broke in half for Xaden here, because he is so clearly hurt that she did not come to their room last night to talk about what the fuck happened. And this is all of chapter 56, what happened. I can just imagine, like, you know, when things are left unsaid with a partner or a friend, you have the most restless night's sleep, and you're lying awake thinking about what are they thinking, what's going to happen, all the worries. And I just feel like he had one of those nights, and that just kills me so much. I agree with both sides here. She needed to figure out how to raise the wards to fully save Tyrrendor. That is no small thing. It makes sense, especially knowing Violet and knowing her I need to help others nature. Of course, that was the thing that she went to first. He also did need his partner in this moment, and to know that they would be able to work this out, or at least be able to fight it out. And the real crack in my heart happened when Xaden said, quote, "Let me in. If just for a second, please let me in." And then saying it's okay for Violet to tell someone that he's an intrinsic, and basically saying it's okay if you put me to my death. Xaden.
Oh, I know, my heart hurt for him so much. I felt for him so much in this moment. He accepts death if it's more or less at Violet's hands, which, oh dear, that could be some serious foreshadowing later, but we're going to skip over that part right now, because yes, it would, of course she would not be the one to actually kill him, but indirectly, if she told anyone, she would be the reason for his death there. And he knows that he's wronged her, and he is willing to pay the consequences if she feels it is the right thing to do. And he has literally put his life in her hands, and he accepts whatever that consequence is. And that's really showcased here.
We do get some Xaden using his signet on Violet confirmations.
Yes, we officially get confirmation that every time her scalp prickled in Fourth Wing, it was indeed Xaden reading her mind. You were right, Nicole.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say it.
I will say it. You were right.
One of the biggest complaints about the intrinsic second signet theory speculation when we were deep dive in Fourth Wing and when we would be talking about it, and what created this massive divide in the fandom of pro second signet being an intrinsic versus not pro it. The main argument here was, if he is an intrinsic, does that make him any better than Dane? And Rebecca Yarros in this scene answers that right here for us. Yes, Xaden used his signet on Violet until she was more to him than the general's daughter. However, that's when he actively, consciously stopped using it. There are many moments past that when she became more to him than general's daughter, we can gather was when they kissed in the snow that first time. And there were many moments after that where he answers thoughts that she did not say out loud. So he explains that there are many moments in their relationship where, because of their bond, it makes it way easy for her to just shout her intentions down the bond, basically. So he's not actively reading her mind, but yes, he's still getting the info nonetheless. But he does say that he stopped also because he knew the harm that Dane did, and he figured he was no better than Dane was. And Violet thinks to herself, quote, "Except Xaden hadn't brokered the information he'd stolen and been responsible for killing Liam and Soleil." That right there makes Xaden way different than Dane and how they used their signets and what information they gleaned from it. So he kept that info to himself. He did not rat Violet out to his father, who fucking killed her friends.
I will say, I do have a question here, because Xaden says he stopped using his second signet the moment Violet was more to him, and that Dane had done harm to her doing what Xaden was essentially doing as well. But Violet became more to Xaden way before we readers and Violet learned exactly what harm Dane did. So my question here is, does Xaden know what Dane was doing while stealing her memories well before Athbane?
I think so, because in chapter 16 of Fourth Wing from Xaden's POV, which is the chapter after Threshing, it's when Dane kisses Violet and all this kind of stuff, there's a line of him basically saying, and there he goes, probably reading her memory again. This is before they kiss, so it makes sense that's the moment where he's like, oh shit, fuck, he's doing exactly what I'm doing.
But that was also before she was anything more to him.
So that's what I'm saying. I think that was his moment of ooh, maybe this isn't very morally good. And then they kissed in the snow and he's like, no more, I'm done. That's my headcanon.
We speculated in previous episodes when that first time that was an accident, when Dane was accidentally stole her memory because he's just so used to touching her, and then how many times afterward were not accidents. I agree that threshing was not an accident. I think that Xaden was aware of that, and I also have to wonder if Dane was really good with his shields at that point, and he was probably able to literally know what Dane's intentions were. But it wasn't for another little while that, I want to say even up to like a month later, that he had feelings for Violet. So I think it was in between. It wasn't quite as early as threshing that he really made a conscious decision not to do that anymore, but it was sometime afterward. Anyway, yeah, I'm thinking Xaden, bottom line here is that I think Xaden knows a better timeline than we do of when those non-accidental memory stealing moments were, and he might even eventually unveil this truth behind our god fucking damn it Dane speculation, and I could see that like maybe that is the puzzle piece that we're missing here of what Dane was really doing back in Fourth Wing.
Well, something I just thought of is at threshing, Violet became more than the general's daughter to him meaning Xaden. She became bonded to him through dragon. So maybe it was all at threshing.
Maybe.
Possibly.
I still think it was more of like the kiss when it was like she became more to him in a emotional way.
That's when he fell in love with her. We know that was the moment he fell in love with her. So maybe this was the moment she became more than just the general's daughter to him. And then later on he fell in love with her.
Yes.
Possibly.
Anyway, my main point is I think that he might be the key to this timeline of when Dane was purposefully stealing memories. And we might get that information later.
Fuck, I hope so.
So as we prepare for this meeting, our Orisha crew has a riot of 10. So I want to break down real quickly who all we know is present. So 4 of the dragons, and therefore we can guess as well as their riders, they hide in the forest. These 4 riders are Brennan, Suri, and Kylan, who are both 2 members of the assembly, and then an unnamed rider from Mira's unit. Then we have the remaining 6 dragons and riders out in the open to greet the Navarre leadership. We have Xaden and Sigale, Violet and Taryn, notably Noah and Darna because she's still a secret to Navarre, Mira and Tiny, Ulysses and his dragon Fan.
Which, fun fact, Fan is Scottish Gaelic. It means faint, feeble, and frail. LOL.
And then we have the other 2 unnamed riders from Mira's unit. So we do know that these 3 unnamed riders, they came with the crew. So 2 must be out in the open and the other one is hidden just based on the math that we receive here. It's important to note too that the assembly has enough members together here for a quorum. I'm assuming this is why they all came and some of them hid because they're still believed to be dead. Because Ulysses, Suri, Kylan, Brennan, and Xaden, they are all members of the assembly and they are all present here.
So that is our Tyrandor side. Now let's talk about our Navarrian side. There are 7 riders among them. That is General Melgren, who's just front and center. We got Lilith. We have Colonel Fremont, who's an incredibly powerful air wielder.
Ah, the source of my air wielder and Nolan theory working together to mend Jack. Yeah, that exhausted air wielder was probably making sure Jack stayed airborne so he couldn't channel from the source. As many of you pointed out, I still like my theory though. I know what it really is, but I still love the idea of 2 signets working together to create a new concept here.
I love you so much. We also have a boxed frame captain who stands next to Lilith, and we have the major who does not have her shields up and who is quite hungry. That's only 5. There's 2 who we just don't really acknowledge in the pages. I'm surprised that Daddy Atos isn't here.
You know, I've been wondering, I'm assuming he's been holding down the fort at one of those coastal outposts and managing them along the coastal border. Is he currently preparing troops to head to Samara? Because later in the stretch of chapters, we learn that those at the coastal outposts, I think we learned that they moved to Samara, and I'm assuming that he was there, meaning going to Samara, and then was part of the Samara crew that then heads back to Bisgayath. I don't think that we do see him on page, though, with everything else going on after the battle, which it seems a little fishy he has not made another appearance. It makes him like extra sus that he's working with the Venin, and I have to wonder if it's almost like when we do learn new insights in book 3 or beyond, that then it'll almost be like he was present just in between the lines of these pages here.
I need to know more about him. Like, it is killing me not knowing more about Daddy Atos. Watch him just be a very mid character and just like nothing really special.
I think as disappointing and anticlimactic as it would still somehow be on theme with his character.
That's so true. Well, I want to talk about Lilith's appearance because she is described as having bruises under her eyes because of how tired she is. Her skin is paler than normal, but her flight goggles, she still has marks on them showing that she's been spending a lot of time in the sky. What the fuck happened to Lilith? Like, what's been going on in Navarre?
I took this as just pure exhaustion and stress wearing her down. If you are a new mom and you have not slept much and you are exhausted and stressed out, you also have deep circles under your eyes. And I think that it is a representation, a show don't tell, of these 6 weeks that they've all had after Xaden's stunt. And now with the Samara battle on the horizon, she's constantly busy and this stress is literally physically wearing her down. Like, it almost makes me feel a little bad for her, even if she's being a total bitch.
Oh, she's being a bitch. She's being a bitch. But I do feel really bad for her, especially when Brennan walks in and that, like, the fact that she is described as the first time Violet has ever seen her shocked. Her husband died. Like, let's not forget that. And this is the first time she sees her mom absolutely shocked. Like, woof. Just goes to show that Brennan is her favorite child. But we're not there yet. I do have to ask the question. Lexi, is Navarrian leadership, are they idiots? They say, let's meet at this outpost. And they meet outside of the outpost. And they're like, we have refreshments waiting on the inside of Athbean. Did they not put 2 and 2 together that they asked Violet to come? Violet, who has been a part of RSC, who has had this serum drug her multiple times, once by Nolan, and then she was tortured as a result. It also freaks me out how casually they're using this potion and the serum. I think they're idiots for doing this move. Like, way to build trust, my guys. Way to go.
I will give the tiny little disclaimer here that we do not get absolute confirmation from Navarre that these refreshments are poisoned. Now, Taryn absolutely agrees with us that they are definitely poisoned, and I think we can put 2 and 2 together here. But again, this is not like an absolute fact, but we're like 95% sure. Yeah, when I reread this part, I was like, ho, 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 you can't fool us with your refreshments trick. And yes, and like I said, Taryn basically confirms what we were all thinking, stating the obvious that it is probably poisoned.
I cannot get over the fact that they were about to poison them and then beg them for their help. Like, Melgren, I've got questions.
Again, that is what we understand from Violet's perspective here, from the trauma that she experienced, from all of them are like, we have learned our lesson. So we don't know this for a fact, but again, 95% sure that they were poisoned.
Oh, I'm like 99.999% sure. Like, it wouldn't have been on the page if they weren't. Like, it just... Now, I'm picking apart Melgren a little bit more because, woof. He has... Lexi, I have my new italics for this book, and that is people getting cut off, because there are so many times where people cut themselves off or are cut off by other characters, mainly Violet, and they're about to say something really fucking important or really interesting, and they just don't get to finish their sentences. So Melgren is going all Daddy Atos at graduation level unhinged right off the bat at this meeting. And he says, quote, "Do you know what destruction you caused by dropping those Wyvern on the outposts? The lengths that we went in order to keep it quiet? The civilians we had to..." What was he about to say? What did they do to civilians? Do they have another Imogen Signet working for them where they can wipe their memories? I have an unhinged theory, but maybe Imogen's a double agent and she's working for them and they're offering her something in exchange. I really don't think that's the case. I want to be very clear. I do not think Imogen's a double agent, but I definitely think someone's wiping memories, or, this is my dark theory, are they just murdering civilians who saw Wyvern?
Yes.
Oh my God. See, normally I would be like, absolutely no way. But he says that Xaden almost tore down centuries of work and the tightly woven defensive strategy they've crafted. They've killed for less, says Gaiath, but that's fucked. That's very fucked up.
I love the innocent theory that they just did memory wiping. I think that, yes, that would be the first and foremost. Go the Harry Potter route and just obliviate them. But this is General Melgren we're talking about here. Like, yeah, he is ruthless and will absolutely kill civilians to protect his secret. He essentially says so about cutting off the hands analogy. And yeah, those poor civilians, they're dead.
That sucks. It sucks.
We also get full clarity here why Melgren let Mira and the other writers at the outposts go. Because he did. He just literally let them all go. And Violet was a little skeptical about this earlier on when Mira and them first arrived. And so we can guess here that he foresaw that they would be needed for an upcoming battle. He knew the Venin were going to eventually come to Navarre, and they needed all of these writers at a future battle. Remember how elite these writers are, what they go through to become a writer. They are not as disposable as other people would be, like, say, civilians or infantry. So with all of this, let's quickly discuss how Melgren's signet works, or at least kind of what we know so far here, because it's understandably a little confusing and vague. So Melgren can see the outcome of future battles, which is monumental for Navarre's military, to have someone that can foresee whether they will win or lose upcoming battles. And apparently he does know when the battles will be as well. If he sees that they lose a battle, then they can preemptively change their strategy, maybe like have more forces or different forces or whatever, or even just not participate in the battle, which would then change the outcome. The future he is able to see can be changed. That is key here, whether from him and his troops or from the other side they're fighting. Take the Samara battle, for example. It does not happen because the Venin go after Basgiath instead. I'm assuming Samara was originally their target before they hit Basgiath, but Jack got everything in order for Basgiath so that they could just go straight there. That's total speculation on my part there. I don't think it was just planted as a distraction. I think that there was originally some plan for it to be Samara, and then that's what Melgren went off of there. So this brings us to why he can't see the Basgiath battle. Melgren cannot use his signet if more than 3 marked ones are present in the battle, thanks to the protection rune Colonel Mari gave all 107 children of the rebel officers. He just isn't able to see the battle at all, and therefore has no inkling of the outcome. It's not like he knows that the vision is inaccessible, it's just that vision is not there whatsoever in the first place. There's a lot of questions circling around why he would let the marked ones live if they render his signet basically useless. And while I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, I will assume he did not know that this was possible until they were already in the writer's quadrant. Remember, this is very new. Xaden is part of the first graduating class, and they are the first ones that are out there in the military after being in the writer's quadrant. There's also workarounds to how they could make this work after they graduate. For instance, making sure that no more than 2 marked ones are stationed at each outpost. And remember, only 2 are allowed to be in each squad as well in the writer's quadrant. So it definitely throws a wrench in his all-powerful signet, and we don't know exactly how that would work or how that will work moving forward. Now, all of this discussion about Melgren's signet leaves us with a lot of questions that I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to. Like, how does he see these battle outcomes? He makes it clear knowing how they win or lose isn't part of it. How does that work then? What counts as a battle? Is it more than X amount of people? Is it in a certain setting? Is it if weapons are drawn? What counts as a battle? How often does he see battles that don't end up happening? I would kind of assume fairly frequently. Maybe we'll learn this in later books, maybe not, but it is such a fascinating signet, and I really do want to know more about it.
I love how your mind works with questions and signets and going like, oh God, I love your mind. Speaking of things that I love, seeing Xaden's second signet in action. Oh my God, I want more of this. Like, I will take it from Violet's perspective where she just asks him. I will take it from Xaden's perspective happily. But in the scene, Violet basically asks him to not feel bad about reading any of her intentions and instead read theirs. And without blinking a fucking eye, he says that everyone but the major on the left is shielded and she's scared. She intends to do whatever she needs to get them to fight. She's hungry, and she also wants to fight with Lilith over her parenting style. To quote Violet, holy shit. Now, we do get him saying to Violet to put her shields back up, but he heard her speak mind to mind when she asked him to read their minds in the first place. So were his shields not up? They must not have been for him to be able to use his signet in the first place. I am just so confused on, because then they talk mind to mind later in the scene. Yeah. So their shields weren't up. I'm so confused on how the shields work and the speaking and the intensive reading and everything.
Yeah, I've given up at this point. I have tried so hard to track how the shields and signets and mind-to-mind bond work, and it makes my head hurt, to be quite frank. I don't think that this is one of those consistencies, and I'm tired of banging my head against the wall with it.
Well, now, I do want to point out, at the end of this book, Xaden is obviously Venin, and he mentions how his shadows feel way more powerful when he's going down to see Jack fucking Barlow in the jail cell. I can only assume if his shadows feel more powerful that his intrinsic power will also be more powerful. Now, Lexi, you brought up a great point in a previous episode where you said because he can read intentions, which is the thing behind the thought, it is already way more powerful than, like, for instance, Jeremiah, who we saw in Fourth Wing, who was just reading everyone's surface level thoughts. So we can already assume that Xaden's intrinsic is really fucking powerful. But because he's now Venin, we can assume that he's going to be even more powerful. So I am foaming at the mouth for more of this. I cannot fucking wait. Because what if he can read people's intentions past shields? Like, what if that's the more powerful version of this?
That would be absolutely game changing. I would absolutely love to see that. Like, it'd be terrifying and exciting and really terrifying at the same time. And it would be game changing. Absolutely.
So here's what we do learn from this meeting at Athbane. We learn that on the winter solstice at Samara, the Venin will fight Navarre and the Venin will win. General Melgren is asking the Tyrandor riot to join forces with them so that they can change the outcome of the battle, and in exchange, King Tauri will respect the independence of the entire Oratian riot and the city of Aratia. I don't know how I missed this on my first few rereads. This is fucking huge. Aratia would literally be able to secede, and in exchange for this, they would not have to conscript any citizens to Besgaiath or the Navarrian army. Navarre will also not be able to fight for Aratia back. Like, they can't just like say, oh, we'll shake on it and then we'll fight for you back. Like, it is a secede, independence, full stop. And Ulysses is like, no, I don't want to do this. Not a chance. Like, this dude is so presumptuous. And Lexi, I have to ask, what are your thoughts? Because would you have taken Melgren up on this offer, yes or no?
Putting aside everything that we know does end up happening with hindsight and everything like that, I will start by saying I absolutely understand the mistrust in Navarre. We were literally just talking about how they probably killed citizens to keep this secret quiet. But like Violet points out, their first priority is and should be protecting all citizens. Yet Ulysses, Brennan, and most of the rest of the assembly have such a chip on their shoulder and are not looking at the bigger picture because of their hatred for Melgren, Lilith, and the rest of leadership. If they are going to be in a big Venin face-off, which everyone seems to guess will eventually happen, then why not do it alongside Navarre and be rewarded with independence in the end? Again, this just goes to show how pissed off they are at Navarre. And it's also very short-sighted, as Violet's inner monologue beautifully describes and captures.
I agree with you completely. I love how you point out how they're focusing so on the minutia versus what this could look like bigger picture, because that kind of seems like the MO of the entire assembly from the get-go of this book. And here it is, just like in full-blown retribution mode.
I also really like how it makes it not black and white with good guys versus bad guys. Navarre is not bad guys, because think about like Kaori and all the other people in the quadrants and all of the citizens and everything like that. Like, they are not bad. It is a number of leadership that has taken them in the wrong direction. And same thing goes with Aratia too. Just because they're part of the revolution does not mean that they are all automatically the good guys. They have some serious therapy issues to work through, and I really think that's on full display here. It's interesting to see how the Aratia crew, and specifically Xaden, are so careful not to let things escalate into drawn weapons. Because if a battle does break out here, Aratia loses. Full stop. They can assume Melgren saw a battle where Navarre wins, and that's why they all went here in the first place. That's why they said no more than 2 marked ones are allowed to come. So our crew is having to be so careful to make sure a battle doesn't happen from the get-go in order for that vision to not even have a chance of coming true. That's why Xaden is just like, no, put your weapons away. I think that's also why Lilith, like, I love that line about how she's the dagger that nobody even saw her get. I really think that it's like tensions are so high here, but Xaden's number one priority is don't let this break out into a fight, which is probably goes against most of his other thoughts when it comes to these kind of interactions.
Oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. I love that connection. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but now it's time to deep dive into it. Lilith seeing Brennan. One of the things that we were speculating in Fourth Wing was, does Lilith know that Brennan is alive? And right here we get a blatant, obvious nope, she did not know. Now we learn in chapter 1 of Fourth Wing that, quote, Mom tolerates me and respects Mira, but she loved Brennan. This reaction from Lilith is easily the most emotion we've ever gotten from her on the pages of this book, and will get from her at least until her death later on in just a few chapters. But Brennan walking into this meeting, verbally slapping her across the face and then walking out is pretty cold, my guy. I'm not gonna lie. I really want to know what happened at the Battle of Erasia, where he supposedly died and she did something. I feel like there was something that happened to make Brennan quite literally hate her so much, especially after he was easily her favorite growing up.
On that same line, I'm more curious about what happened to convince Brennan to switch sides, and certainly there could be some overlap here in this question, and if it truly was as simple as learning the truth about Venin and Navarre hiding the big secret. That certainly is enough for Violet to get pissed off at everybody. And then for Brennan too, his mom sent him into battle to protect the self-serving societal structure. And yeah, that could make anyone hate their mom, because she does send him to his death in that way. But the level of his absolute hatred for her does make me wonder if there's a little bit more to the story here, especially to the point where his hatred for her is so much more important to uphold than the lives of innocents, which is the whole reason he hates her in the first place. He is supposed to be a brilliant strategist, and I'm sorry, I have only seen maybe 70% of that in this book. And, I'm not a big Lilith fan. I really do love the complexity of her character. But of course, most of us are not big Lilith fans for obvious reasons. But Brennan's unwavering hate and that chip on his shoulder, it really does rub me the wrong way. I'll be honest, I thought I was going to like Brennan more in Iron Flame. It's kind of okay that I'm not a big Brennan fan either. I love when characters do have their flaws, especially when they do make sense, which I do think that his makes sense. But I don't really like him.
I also can't help but think he has an orange dragon. And the orange dragons that we have seen in this book are Solus, Bade.
Well, what about Imogen?
Yeah, that makes me nervous too. See my double agent comment earlier.
You say that, it was just like, geez. There is so much more to the Brennan story. Like, a lot of our listeners speculate that he is a Venin, especially think about that rune in his hand and what Naolan did and even sacrificed for Brennan to have to come back. Not only sacrificing Naolan's life or his soul if he did turn Venin, but even what Brennan had to sacrifice in that as well. And there's a lot of Brennan questions, and I really think that we've only gotten a surface level of the story behind him and maybe what all went down with him and Lilith.
I'm not going to lie. On our first reactions episode of this podcast, we kind of speculated, where is Mira's story going? And we kind of said oh, what if Mira turned bad, basically? If any of the three Sorrengail children turn bad, I actually am leaning now towards Brennan being the one who does it. And I'm going to be really curious as to where Brennan goes in the story, especially if Naolan is Venin, if Naolan and Brennan were lovers. What's it going to be like when they face off on the battlefield together? Because I could see that going poorly.
Very possibly. We do have to give Brennan some credit. He did mend the Wardstone. He was a central part of bringing the wards back, and he does see the wrong in his ways, even though he's still a dick to his mom when they do confront her. I didn't come back here for you kind of thing. I also have to wonder if, think about the assembly. They're all just parrots with each other. They all, yes, of course, they all have kind of unique perspectives, and there's a quorum for a reason, and they might disagree, but they all have the same line of thinking ultimately. And I think that when you put those people in the same room with all those same ideologies and that same revenge and hatred for another set of people, that it's going to just fuel it for each and every one of them. Yeah. And I think that Brennan, maybe over the last 6 years, that hatred just really festered, and it was nurtured by the assembly as well. And so that's where he is today too.
Well, you said it perfectly on a previous episode where you said, Brennan's been out of Navarre for too long. He's so distanced himself to the point where he is very narrow-minded. The assembly and Navarrian side of this leadership meeting both are looking very, very telescope inward. They are not looking outward, bigger picture. I mean, I think Melgren's trying to with the whole King Tower is going to let you secede. But he also was hey, here's some, refreshments that are most likely poisoned.
And later on in this search of chapters, we also do kind of get a glimmer into he's probably bluffing here. So
yeah.
He could absolutely have I do think that he has an alternative agenda here. And this is them kind of testing the waters. And the Assembly is not going to play their games. And maybe you and I here are a little bit more naive as well as Violet. And it's like, no, like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that might be the approach that the Assembly's going with here.
Oof. Well, we should talk about Lilith and her obscene amount of information that she knows. Because after this meeting disperses, Ulysses and Brennan are like, nope, we're done. Peace out, Squirrel Scout. And literally, Melgren is like, say goodbye to your children, Lilith, which, what a good coworker. So Lilith is talking to Just Violet and Mira, and she mentions, quote, cut open the bodies of the wyvern who died crossing your border yesterday. And then Violet and Mira are like, how the fuck do you know where we are? Because crossing your border yesterday, that's not only knowing where they are, but that's knowing what's happening where they are. That's a lot of information. And she also says yesterday. This is new. Like, this is very recent information. She says, quote, why ever did you think I'd be ignorant of activities on your border? Ignorant of where my children are? So my question is, who slipped in Eratia and let Lilith know the whereabouts and the whatnots that are happening in Tyrandor?
I hadn't thought of it that way. I just assumed that with a riot of 200 dragons, plus a bunch more who left the outpost to be found and taken to Eratia, they wouldn't be like that difficult to spot. I feel like our Eratia crew feels like they're a lot more sneaky and secretive than they actually are. Or Lilith doesn't know about Eratia and she knows that they're just in Tyrandor because that's kind of common sense, able to put two and two together. Or Lilith doesn't know about Eratia specifically, but of course she does know about Tyrandor and they were able to put two and two together about the borders. But then to your point, she knows some very specific details about the borders and yesterday and the wyvern. And how did they know that the Venin were coming for their border in the first place? Like, did someone from their inside who had secret Venin intel that they were going to attack? Or, like, to your point, maybe there is indeed a mole in Eratia, like Dane. I'm just kidding. I don't really think he's a double agent. Well, I'm mostly kidding. Kath's breath did smell bad for a reason, and we can never forget that.
I just love that it's like, Dane's bad because Kath's breath smells, and that is the hill we are willing to die on. It kills me. It's so funny. I really think that there is some kind of double agent in Eratia who is at least double agenting with Lilith. Maybe it's not with all of General Melgren's, because he didn't really sound like he knew where they are, or at least he didn't let on to know where they are. I think that Lilith's playing a much more dangerous game of chess here. So my question is, who would be the Eratian mole? Now, at the very beginning of this book, we were speculating who's the Navarian mole. I don't think it's Lilith, obviously, because she was corresponding with Brennan, even though he is going by Lieutenant Colonel Aeserai, so who knows there. But I do think that there's far more people who are pulling strings behind the scenes than we are knowing about.
And I'll be curious how that plays out in future books because Lilith has died now. Like, a lot of mysteries are still up in the air when it comes to her and their family and things like that. And now with her being gone, I have to wonder if it actually opens up those mysteries because now we are able to kind of, I'll say, question them without her hovering over us.
And who's going to take over her role as leader of Bezgaeth War College after this?
Well, Panchek, probably.
Probably, but I also could see a Daddy Atos stepping in.
I don't know.
We'll see.
I don't know.
That is going to be a head scratcher. I cannot believe this. It has been multiple episomes since we have mentioned this. And you know what? Someone in YouTube comments was like, we need to make a Fantasy Fangirls bingo card for every episode and smack dab in the middle. And I'll probably make one before this episode comes out. I think I'm going to do that later today.
Yes!
But smack dab in that bingo card is going to be Papa Sorrengail's research, because it strikes again in this episode. So from Lilith, quote, your father told me once that his research showed that Warwick never wanted anyone else to hold the power of the wards. He wanted Navarre to eternally hold the upper hand, but Lyra thought the knowledge should be shared. Papa Sorrengail's research is going to be the death of me. How did he know this? What was he researching?
It's just one more thing to connect Papa Sorrengail's research with Andarna, whether that's researching Feathertails or the Seventh Den, because now I'm all riled up about Papa Sorrengail's research again. I have so many thoughts about this, and I just, oh my God, I just...
Yeah, That noise exactly. That's exactly how I feel about this fucking research. It is driving me crazy.
It could be as simple as he read their journals and was able to easily decipher from reading both of those. Just based on Lyra's journal, because she is a little bit more open about how she's the only one who wants to share this knowledge, and then Warwick's journal does not give any information on that. So maybe Papa Sorrengail was just able to read between the lines with his and understand that, or maybe it must be documented elsewhere too. This part could just be, as he was doing separate research, he came across this knowledge too, and it really is just like a side piece of information, and it's not something to get super hung up on. But the point is that it brings back his research, and the way that Rebecca Yarros writes and sprinkles in his research and new little clues, and it's just like new tiny bits of information. We don't know what's important. We don't know what's just supplemental, but that's part of the fun, is us just speculating and spiraling.
Well, and here's a fun connection, is this means that Papa Sorrengail was talking to Lilith about what he was researching. So this means that she knows a lot of the things that were going on behind the scenes. We have speculated, honestly, it's so canon in my head now, even though we haven't had it confirmed on the page, that Papa Sorrengail was murdered by leadership because of his knowledge and what he was researching. Lilith knows everything that he was researching. So I'm wondering if she said something or whatever about, oh, you know, my husband's researching this, and she started the dominoes that led to his death.
Oh, that'd be so sad.
I know.
I don't think that she would know it though. Or
no,
well,
I
don't think she would
accident.
mention it to her kids, but like the fact that she's just like, oh my gosh. So much to think about.
All right. So we leave the Athbane meeting and we get this fucking wyvern scene. And oh my God, we need to talk about this. So here's the scene. I'm going to set it up. Violet and Mira go to the wyvern who crossed in a Tyrandor, who are just like sack of dead potatoes on the ground. Mira carves out of this wyvern an onyx stone with a super complex rune on it. Few things that I need to freak out about. Number one, onyx stone. That is a very specific color to mention being tied to the wyverns. Onyx is also always how Xaden's eyes are described. It's onyx with gold flecks in them, which is so fun because it's also the color of Tarn and, at least last year, Andarna. So again, but here it's connecting that dark magic, that wyvern, the venin, all of that kind of stuff with Xaden. Fucking brilliant. I love it. And then number two, Violet says, quote, "Oh shit, is this why the wyvern have suddenly reappeared? Did someone give them runes?" Finish that thought, Violet. Did someone give them fucking runes? And if so, who?
So were they given runes, or did they have the ability because they can also wield power? I think that this is a classic Rebecca Yarros where Violet is onto something, but she's not quite on the nose with it. So it's not that someone gave them runes, but they are a lot more powerful and resourceful than anybody thinks. I'm leaning toward Venin discovering the lost art of rune making when they left the Barrens 50 years ago or so. We know that they aren't just coming from the Barrens, they started being in Pormeal, and even though Pormeal also wasn't aware of runes, at least the Flyers weren't, I have to wonder if there's a connection there. The timeline is starting to kind of come together just a little bit. And I do think because that is when they started getting more powerful. And I think that as they suck more power out of Pormeal, as they really start invading, they're able to create more and more wyvern because they have more stored power, so to speak.
Fuck, that's a great point. Oh my God. There's a third moment, however, that I need to call out from this scene. Quote, "As if the stone has called to its partner, the carcass 20 feet away shudders and our heads whip towards the giant golden eye that blinks open." It really stood out to me that it wasn't until Mira and Violet were holding this dark magical rune and then the wyvern twitches. Could this be a moment of Violet's second signet of amplification at work here? If she indeed amplified magic as a whole, not just signets, but runes alike, and just being near a rune caused it to almost recharge and resurrect, that could be a huge moment here. However, this could also be a clue of Violet being part Venin. There is many a theory that when Lilith was pregnant with Violet, she was in some kind of encounter with a Dark Wielder. Now, whether that was Lilith getting hurt with a Venin poison tip dagger, or Lilith drawing power from the source and turning Venin herself. Now, if she did, it would be one of the very, very low levels of Venin. See Lexi's archive section today, because it's all about Venin and I'm so excited. But as a result of Lilith having some kind of connection to dark magic, She birthed Violet, and Violet came out with her signature silver hair, aka the essence of her hair was drained, or the color was drained from it, just like the color is drained from the earth when the venin pulled from the source. Now, if Violet has some kind of venin essence within her, what if her holding the stone was almost like a like calls to like moment, and the wyvern recognizes Violet as dark magic and twitched back to life?
Dang, now I'm thinking about all of that. I had figured the rune somehow, some way reactivated just when they touched it. And then when one does, it triggers others nearby to activate as well. I reread this part several times because I really wanted to be clear on who was touching it. And from what we gather on page, it is Mira holding the rune. I have so many tangled thoughts when it comes to these runes and how they're still humming behind the words, and then Mira and Violet accidentally reactivate them. I'm realizing that the venin probably could have reanimated these wyvern after they fell and died behind the wards because the runes were, of course, still active. And we also know that we learn later in the stretch of chapters, the venin do not know that their wards are only like half wards. The venin do think that their wards are up, and that's why they're not they're even trying to go past those wards. That's not their target right now anymore.
Now, well, with Mira holding the stone, that could speculate a whole other thing about, Mira, maybe now that she's able to create wards, or she's like ultimately more powerful, she kind of Pokemon up leveled. So maybe that means that she can now create more power with runes. I don't know, but something is super sus about how when it was around Violet and Mira, that's when it recharged.
Maybe it's also just because remember that power just kind of emanates off of them constantly.
That's true.
Just small amounts. And so maybe it's simply the runes recognizing power, and that's what made them reactivate.
Yeah. I do love how literally Violet, without even a second thought, just like bolt of lightning comes down and hit. And it shows like how much she is learning how to aim, how to use her signet. I'm so proud of our girl.
Me too. Like that scene right there would have been like a full-blown battle scene back and forth wing. And now it's just like, nope. It's like a little, like a moth when it poor thing goes into the flight and like and dies.
Wow. I just heard that sound so clearly in my head. I just did it. All right. Xaden and Violet sparring. I think that this is such a underrated, beautiful scene in this book. I love this scene. So after not seeing each other for almost a week, Xaden invites Violet to the sparring mat for them to literally fight out all of their problems. Healthy communication. Now, in last episode, I gave Xaden a lot of shit for holding a dagger to Violet's neck during the What's Your Second Signet scene. But here Violet does the same fucking thing. Now they're literally on a sparring mat and they are fighting, so it's a little bit different, and he doesn't like whip one out of the shadows. She like literally has one strapped on her. But the bastard, as she's holding this dagger to his neck, he leans into it. It's just like, you little, my goodness. So yes, this is a very different situation. But maybe just like a rule while they're making them, hey, let's not hold daggers to each other's necks. That might be a nice addition to this deal that they're making. Now, they make some rules for their relationship. Xaden makes the rule of no fighting in our bedroom. And honestly, I like this rule. I like this rule a lot. And as I was doing this outline, Brett was like, he was just finishing up with work and he was in the kitchen. And I immediately brought this up to Brett. But he was very distracted with work stuff going through his head. And it was definitely not the right time for me to bring up this idea. So it was a little shaky at first. But later he did agree. He was like, oh, this is a great rule. Yes, let's do it. So thank you, Rebecca Yarros, for helping me in my marriage. Now, Violet's rules, because there are multiple versus Xaden's one, she says, no more secrets, no more ask me, no more tests. It's full disclosure or nothing. She gives him a fucking ultimatum. Now, Xaden immediately agrees with done. And at first I was like, what the fuck, Xaden? Why does he just immediately agree to this now when she's been asking him this for X amount of pages? But the reason is because now she knows his deepest, darkest secret to end all secrets. He is now actually able to agree to this deal that she's asking. Whereas earlier he wouldn't have been able to consciously, at least truthfully, make this agreement because he couldn't tell her what his second signet was. See him literally being afraid that she was going to tell on him and kill him. Now, Xaden's only stipulation to this rule is that, quote, I need to know you'll be here, that no matter what happens, you'll come back and we'll talk it out or we'll fight it out. This right here. We've talked about on this podcast, especially in our Iron Flame reactions episode, how we were like, why is Violet just in bed with her now Venin boyfriend? What's happening? It's right here. This is why she's in bed with him after he turned Venin. Violet says to him in this moment, quote, "I love you. You could throw my entire world into upheaval and I will still love you. You could keep secrets, run a revolution, frustrate the shit out of me, probably ruin me, and I would still love you." Well, I'm going to be curious as to how this holds up next book.
Especially based on her line that she said earlier that we were talking about at the top of the episode about, I don't know how many more this times I have in me, where love is not enough. And there's a lot of emphasis on love in this part here. I will say, I'm very proud of us for how much patience we've had for Violet, being upset about Xaden keeping secrets from her. I think we've had quite a bit more patience than others in the fandom. But this scene where she's still saying the same thing she's been saying all book, and her whole laundry list of rules that she has, no more secrets, no more, you were just listening, I had to finally roll my eyes and I huffed a sigh of frustration at her because she knows his biggest secret now and it is still somehow not enough for her. Like, yes, it is in a way, but like this is the part, this scene right here, as much as I do love it with them fighting it out on the sparring mat and his way of communicating with her, this was the scene where I finally got frustrated with Violet. I got over her and how she talks about his secrets and whatnot. I love our girl Violet. You all know that. Her character's conflict is very on par with her, and that's why we support this writing and this character development and flaws. As frustrating as it is to follow along as a reader. But yeah, this is the point where I officially went, come on, and I was fully on Xaden's side.
Now, I do love that line about that you said, like, he gave her his deepest, darkest secret, and yet it's still not enough. In putting on my little like psychology brain for a second, in heterosexual relationships specifically, there is a very common pattern that the guy can give the woman the sun and the stars, basically, and she would still be like, well, you didn't take out the trash yesterday. And it's not black and white like this. This is just a common pattern. So it's just funny how seeing that in action here, where like Xaden is literally like, you could like use this information, you could kill me with it, all this stuff. And she's like, I still need more, bitch. Like, I just love that.
And I will say too, it's like, okay, if he has this secret, what else could he possibly be hiding? It is like kind of like that.
This is it though. I do think this is it because of how quickly he agrees earlier when he's like done. Absolutely. Yes. Because he would not have agreed that quickly if he still had something else up his sleeve.
Now, he does still use the phrasing, I will tell you anything that concerns you. That's paraphrasing right there, but it is that emphasis on whatever concerns you, I will tell you. And I think, again, I've used the CIA agent reference so many times. It's Rebecca Yarros' favorite as well. And I could still see her having issues with things that he doesn't tell her later on. Like, and we will see how Violet does with this.
It'll be very interesting.
There's a line that stood out to me as a possible Violet second Signet hint. She says, I am a person who needs information to center myself. And we know that Signets manifest according to who people are at their core. I don't think she'll be another intrinsic, like Xaden, as much as that falls into this line of thinking here. But I do think that her need for information is tied into her second Signet. And again, I have to reiterate, I want it to happen so badly that her second Signet really represents her scribeness. I think that would be absolutely fitting. I can't say that enough times.
Now with this hold, I'm a type of intrinsic, that does open up the possibility of, are there other types of intrinsics? And if she is one of those types, we'll see how that manifests. I think it would have been a little bit more quote unquote blatantly obvious on the page. I think if there was an instance, it would be the throne scene that we would see that. I agree with you. I really hope it's something attached to her scribe nature.
Or maybe if it was combining the two of them, she can tap into all of the knowledge that someone knows. Not their thoughts, not their memories, but the actual knowledge that they know. I don't feel like we saw any of that in this book, and I don't know where in the world we would get any supporting evidence for that. But just thinking about who she is at her core.
Well, and this is why I love the idea of her being able to resurrect the dead. We dove into a million reasons why that also cannot be her second Signet in episode 6. So if you want the whole back and forth of that, listen to that episode. But I love that idea because if that's the case, she'd be able to resurrect anyone and talk to them, resurrect, I'm going to say like more like I see dead people kind of a situation where she'd be able to talk to Lyra. She'd be able to talk to her father. She'd be able to talk to people and get the information that she needs firsthand.
I'm only 80% sure that it's not her second signet.
I think I'm similar with that one.
Yeah.
I'm similar in that percentage.
I think that there are enough ways to work around that and to make it still make sense.
We'll see. Violet starts asking Xaden questions, fully open book-like. Xaden tells her to basically ask anything she wants to know. He says, like, do you want to ask about my grandfather and Sigale? Do you want to ask her about the rebellion? And Violet thinks maybe something easier and then asks where his mother is. I just want to point out, that's easier. And then Violet says this thing here, quote, it's like you were hatched and not born. Another Wyvern tie-in to Xaden. I freaking love it.
Wait, but Wyvern weren't hatched either.
But remember earlier in the book, even Xaden is like, yeah, where are all these Wyvern hatching? There's just always this like Wyvern hatching. Got it, that's not actually true. But we do learn this about Xaden's mother. She left when he was young. Fen and her marriage contract said that she had to stay until an heir reached the age of 10, and then you're free to go, woman. And then she literally peaced out, Squirrel Scout. She was like, I'm out of here. Now, he has not heard from her since, but this is a fucking promise from the author that she is going to come back into our story. Now, is she somewhere in Poromil? Is she on those damn Isle Kingdoms? There's another thing on the bingo card.
I was just going to say.
Is she a Venin? The list goes on and on about Mama Ryerson or whatever her name/last name is. But I would be shocked if we don't see her in book 3. I think that we will see her probably in book 3.
Oh, I'm going to go with maybe even book 4 because I think book 3 is going to be really focused on Venin and their backstory and Jack and the cure and kind of all of the undercover Venin stuff. And then I could see her showing up in book 4. I can't believe we still have 3 more books.
I know.
Like, just thinking about like all the possibilities.
In our reactions episode, we were like, whoa, these things that we thought were going to happen in book 4 or 5 happened in book 2. And we were like, oh my God, this world is so much bigger than we think it is. And it's just a friendly reminder that we're talking about this stuff and like, this world is going to continue to grow and be so much bigger than we can even fathom, which I'm so excited.
Which is why today's Venin episode is an addendum to episode 8 from our 4th wing, because pretty much everything we knew is not true, and now I needed to redo it.
Can you imagine how long the Venin episode is going to be when we cover book 3? Because for anyone who's like, are you guys going to cover book 3? Yes, when book 3 comes out, we will be covering it just like we did with these episodes. I feel like every book that comes out, you'll need to do an addendum to the Venin archive.
By the end of this, I just need to do a whole book on Venin, essentially.
Dissertation level. Like, oh my God, I love it. Now, Violet, she continues asking questions and she asks about Xaden's second signet manifesting. And Xaden says that it helps that the writer on record was thought to be his great uncle, not his grandfather. How? How is like... Was this a faulty moment in their record keeping? I don't think so, because it's the scribes and they just don't do that. I'm assuming that this is something about Fen's dad. I don't think that this is Xaden's mom, but that's mainly because I can't shake the feeling that Xaden's mom is Poromilian. I wonder if we're going to get explanations, but I think Lexi has a theory. Give it to me.
I'm not able to connect the dots yet. I have tried and I can't connect the dots. But I am convinced that if Xaden and Bodhi are indeed actually siblings, as we speculated, that there is a connection here to his grandfather supposed to be his great uncle. I have tried to figure it out. I've literally been like writing out like family tree stuff and trying to piece together how this possibly could be, the scenarios in which case that this could possibly be connected. And I am really coming up short. But I just needed to throw that out there, that this could be key to Xaden's sibling, possibly Bodhi, possibly not. But the fact that it is his great uncle on record, but it was actually his grandfather, that's just like some like kind of random info sprinkled throughout that I really think is going to play a key part in learning later on about Xaden's family.
I'm so excited. I love that idea. And then last but not least on the sparring scene, Xaden says that he had 2 new daggers made for Violet. And he basically is like, disarm me and they're yours. And we get a quote, I slide my hand down his chest and do just that. So here's my question, Lexi. Did they fuck? Is that the disarming that she did here? This is like Rebecca Yarros doing a closed door sex scene? Or did they actually spar and she actually disarmed them? This like keeps me up at night, this question.
Can't it be both?
Kinky.
It can be both.
Both. Let's go with both.
They are way too much of horny bunnies to have everything happen on page. Like, we...
Nah, not for me. I wouldn't have been mad about a fourth scene.
So taking a quick step back, during Battle Brief, we learn about the updated Venin invasion. And I have to say, I would love to see a map with all of these red dots so we can visually see what Violet sees before figuring out the ultimate plan. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of what it looks like in my head, but I am not artistic enough, or maybe I just haven't taken the time to like put a bunch of red dots on it. And if you have it, please let me know so we can visually see what Violet sees before figuring out the ultimate plan.
Yes. And speaking of figuring out the ultimate plan, Violet's mind here is amazing. And I'm not going to lie, it took me about 4 reads of this chapter to follow along with her thoughts, at least in the early section of when she's piecing it all together. The first time I read this, I was like, what is happening? Like, what is going on?
I will say she makes some pretty big leaps, and I'm going to walk us all through it here in a few moments, but I do think she makes some big leaps.
Now, well, again, this is Violet using her mind of a scribe. We hear all the time throughout these 2 books, the mind of a scribe, the heart of a writer, and this is that on full display. But Lexi, walk us through it, because I'm still not sure I understand it, and I've read this chapter 5 times.
All right, let's see if we can clear the air here. How does Violet come to the realization that Samara isn't the target, but actually Basgiath is the target? Because similarly, it took me a few times to fully understand this, and I'm still a little bit like, did I miss something? Okay, so the updated map shows that the Venin have left previously held strongholds in Poromil and are primarily gathering at the border directly across from Samara. The Venin left the Tirish border and everywhere in the south, though they do still have a presence in the northern provinces of Signesen and Braverick, including keeping their strategic stronghold of Zolia. So they do still have some of their strategic strongholds, but they have primarily left most of them to mostly gravitate toward the border right by Samara there. So again, they're focusing on the border at Samara, but they are still spread out along the Navarian border. Okay, so we have that there. Now, this fact that they're gathering at the border across from Samara, it makes sense. They're preparing for the battle. That's what everybody here is seeing. Okay, cool, that checks out. Alternatively, we can assume Melgren is preparing for his battle by needing to arm his forces with alloy weapons that kill the Venin. But if he takes alloy from the outposts to arm his forces, that automatically weakens the wards around the borders. Because remember, alloy keeps the wards strong when they're stretched to their limits at these borders. So Melgren has to be strategic about where he takes alloy from. It's better to take them from the coastal outposts where ward strength isn't as important as along the Poromilian border. And therefore, he has to put the alloy in the hands of his forces and at these Poromilian border outposts, because they're the ones that need the extra ward boosts, because that's what the Venin are going to be trying to come through. Assuming Melgren does this with the alloys being strategically spread out there, the idea is that no matter how many Venin are at the border, they can't get through the wards. It doesn't matter how many there are, because guess what? The wards are working. Even if they did disable Samara's extended wards, Basgiath and the hatching grounds should still be safe, because the natural wards from that ward stone protect about 4 hours distance from the Vale. So Samara, remember, it's about 8 hours away from Basgiath. The wards, which are extended because of the alloy, they would shrink back about halfway between Basgiath and Samara. So they would still be protected about 4 hours perimeter around Basgiath. Therefore, the Vale is not actually in jeopardy. This leads Brennan and co. to believe Melgren is actually bluffing, scaring them into thinking that all of Navarre, specifically the Vale, would be vulnerable if Samara fell. We have that knowledge. Now let's look at the big picture again. The Venin enemy is gathered in terrifying numbers at this border by Samara, and we learn that they've been sitting there for 3 days. They're not moving, they're literally just there. Why? Why is the question that Violet is asking, and that is what is causing those alarm bells, because that is how she realizes Samara is not the target. If the Venin aren't moving in on their intended target of Samara, when by all means they should be, they have no reason not to be moving there when they're just sitting there for 3 days, that must mean that Samara is not their target after all. And if they have dispatched additional hordes all around the border there, even though most of them are congregated over by Samara, Samara, they are still strategically placed all around Navarre's borders, as if they're waiting for something. Again, that waiting for something after they've all gotten into place. And not just like a few hours, but like days on end here. So they're stationed at the border. They're not attacking it. However, what must they be waiting for? Well, that's what Violet figures out. They are waiting for all of the wards to fall. They're stationed at the border, they're not attacking it, and they're clearly waiting for something. What would they be waiting for? All of the wards to fall. Which brings us to the conclusion of, if they are needing all of the wards to fall, what is the ultimate target? Where are they really and truly trying to get to? The Veil. And that is how Violet pieces it together and realizes that they are not actually going to attack Samara. They are waiting for the wards to all fall so that they can go right into Basgiath.
Well, we should note the Veil because which beautifully done, Lexi. You just helped me a lot. Thank you, actually. But we should note the Veil because it is the strongest energetic area of all of the land. The Venin would literally be able to feed there for years and years and years and be basically unstoppable if they're able to channel from where the Veil's hatching grounds are, which is terrifying, and I don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
If they are able to get to the Veil, they win.
They win.
Like, that's just the bottom line. They win if they are able to access the Veil.
So in Violet's realization, she is like, let's yeet on out of here. We gotta go. And as they're leaving, Marin gives Violet a quiver of Mayersight arrows and tells her, do not drop this because you will go sky high if you do. And I thought for sure this was foreshadowing something that Violet was going to use in the battle. Like she was going to like throw it off of Terran's back towards the Venin and create a huge explosion in the final battle, but alas, that did not happen. And I realize now in hindsight that actually wouldn't have worked because the Venin at Russin literally walked out of an explosion just like do, not a scratch on them. But I'm excited to see how Mayersight might be playing more into our story.
I am as well. They would have to be used on the Wyvern, and Violet has her own weapon that is very effective, which is that pure power there.
I love learning more about these mated dragon bonds because we learn that Grime, who is in Basgiath, was reaching out to her mate, Maze, who is in Samara with Coda. And remember that Terran and Sigale, they can't communicate from Samara to Basgiath when Xaden was stationed there in part one of our story. They could just sense emotions across that great distance. But apparently, the longer you're mated, like for instance, Grime and Maze have been mated for decades, the longer distances you can communicate over.
I'm just going to say it. I really hope Sigale and Terran are around long enough to build that mating bond up because it's so cute.
How fucking dare you?
I just had to say it though.
I hate that. I hate that so much. I do not think Terran's making it out of the story alive. Like the more I think about it, oh god, which means Sigale as a result. But because now Xaden, he's not tethered to Sigale anymore, so Xaden could very easily live if Sigale died, and I hate that. I hate it a lot. Moving on to other things I hate. Why did Daddy Atos show Dane where the wards are in Basgiath? So as Lilith is not believing anything her youngest daughter is saying, Dane mentions that Lilith won't need to take them to the wards after all because he was shown by his father where they are last year. Now, we've speculated that Daddy Atos is working with the Venin, whether that means he is one or just controlling them. Lexi and I are both leaning towards the latter there. We've also speculated that Dane's dragon, Kath, having bad breath means that he is somehow under control of dark magic. And possibly Dane is too associated with dark magic. Without knowing it, we really do not think Dane is any aware Venin by any means. But what if Daddy Atos showed Dane where the wards are in hopes that Dane would actually continue his work, or he'd be able to control Dane in this way that Jack fucking Barlow actually ends up destroying the wards? So what if Daddy Atos planned this all out through Dane and in showing him the wards, but then he was like, oh, maybe Dane's actually too goody-goody. You know what? This Jack fucking Barlow kid is unhinged. And he showed Jack instead.
As much fun as that is, I am going to put a little kink in that timeline there because Jack's broken body was still getting mended when Daddy Atos left for the coastal post. But I definitely do have to wonder if there's a connection. I was under the assumption that Daddy Atos showed Dane just as another way of showing that he was his protege and getting Dane to really buy into Navarre and everything that they stand for there, knowing that Dane was eventually going to learn the truth just because of his signet and what he was going to be doing later on as he grew up there. So that was my understanding. Yeah. But you never know.
Daddy Atos is up to some sus shit. That is what I'm taking away from that like little mention right there. Well, speaking of sus shit, Crod, Garrick's dragon, who is hypersensitive to runes, begins to sense some type of energy in the very same sense of energy that he felt in Resin. This should have been an alarm moment. And I love this moment on a reread because, yes, Jack fucking Barlow placed boxes, plural, as a lure to the Venin so that they'd know exactly where to go when the wards are down. I love this idea that the Venin are just like dogs on a scavenger hunt. Like they are like a treat was placed in the house and they can sniff it out. Like that's the way I'm looking at them, to make them less scary.
I'm a little bit surprised that this wasn't a bigger red flag for our crew as they were trying to figure out how the wards were going to fall at Biscayeth. I mean, I suppose that they're already doing everything they can by going to inspect the ward stones. So Violet's kind of like, okay, that's great information, but we're already on it, so it's just supplemental. But I see this, and maybe it's just because hindsight is 20/20, but I see this as a warning that Violet pretty much disregarded, despite all of them being on high alert, looking for something out of place. And again, she was already working toward the same goal, and so maybe that's why she disregarded it a little bit. But yeah.
Ugh. I really hope we learn more about these runes that attract Venin. Again, like you said, there's 3 more books. We keep on saying book 3, and that's just kind of my catch-all.
Yeah, right? I have to wonder who is creating these runes. Is it only the Venin who are creating them? Because somebody placed those in Resin, in the town right next to Resin as well, to like lure them all there. And I don't know if it was the Venin. I have to wonder if somebody on the inside at Biscayeth. Again, remember, nobody even knows that runes exist anymore. They're supposed to be banned. It is a lost magic. And clearly not.
Here's an idea. If our crew is ever needing to wipe a lot of Venin off the map and they feel confident that they can face off against a lot of Venin, just get those runed boxes and put them in an area that they all go feral over and just boom, like strike them down, like at least they know that that's an option.
You know who's really good at runes and tracking runes?
Cat. Really quick note here also on Crod, because Crod means pain in Scottish Gaelic, which we know that most of the time the translation in Gaelic of the dragon's name is some kind of wink, wink, hint, hint to our character's signets. We don't know Garrick's signet yet, and Crod means pain. So I wonder if Garrick's signet is like torture.
That's absolutely possible because, again, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it in battle. We haven't seen it just on a day-to-day basis. So it's got to be one of those more obscure signets there. And
now, he was not in the most powerful riders in Oratia category. So if he is torture, maybe it's just like a light torture. You know what I mean?
Light torture.
Like a light torture.
Maybe it's like some like super random signet where it's like he can just like take fingernails off of people and like that's it.
I hated that.
I don't actually think that's what it is. I should say that. I don't think that's what it is. I'm just having fun here. Friends, it is time, and we're about to be talking about someone where we're going to be dropping a lot of F-bombs. So we gave that content warning earlier, but we're going to give it like that extra bit here now too. So, I hate him so much.
We learn that it's Bade who's behind this wardstone and in this wardstone chamber. And Bade has these weirdly opaque eyes. Now, this is the only time we see opaque eyes on a dragon. We can assume that when Venin are controlling their own dragons, their eyes go opaque. I also assume that we're going to learn a lot more about this in my catch-all of book 3, but that seems pretty set in because of how Rebecca has sprinkled in information that we do learn a lot about Jack and his veninification in book 3. Now, all of this to say, guess who also is in this chamber with Bade the dragon?
Jack fucking Barlow. Okay. When I first read that Bade was in this chapter here, I was like, oh my God, it is finally time for us to learn the mystery behind why Jack was brought back. But I did not have this on my bingo card.
Well, I want to know how Jack fucking Barlow knew how to do this. Who taught Jack fucking Barlow how to destroy the wards? Because as far as it seems, this was like a recipe, quote unquote. Dragon blood extinguishes the flame. Then a dragon or something else fucking huge has to fall on the stone, cracking it and, dispersing it into a million pieces.
I thought that it was more of the extinguishing of the flame, which is done by a dragon's blood, we can assume there. And that is what truly causes the wards to go down. And the wardstone falling and crashing was a dramatic consequence of that, which made it that much harder for our crew to be able to then imbue and make the wardstone go back up.
Possibly. No matter what, slicing a dragon's throat open on a iron flame is a very specific thing to do. And Jack fucking Barlow is not smart enough to figure this out on his own.
I'm going to talk about speculate a little bit how they all communicate with each other later on, because he was his whole evil villain monologue here. He has absolutely been given instructions. He has been told what to do. He makes that very clear. He is a soldier for someone else here. And we have to speculate how they are communicating.
Well, before you get into that, because I'm foaming at the mouth for your analysis of this, I want to mention that Rosebud pointed out this to us on TikTok. When we were doing our Fourth Wing deep dive, we were simultaneously looking up the dragon names as they came across the pages and looking up their Scottish Gaelic meanings. And we found out that Bade in Scottish Gaelic means town, which is kind of like, meh, not really sure about that. But then we found the Urban Dictionary meaning, which means goodbye. And we cackled at this during Fourth Wing because we were thinking it meant goodbye to Jack fucking Barlow.
I wish.
But no, we were baiting goodbye to our own fucking dragon. This is genius. I love this. God fucking damn it, Jack.
So it seems that Jack knew Violet and her crew were going to be here, saying she is right on time. That's ominous, and it opens up a lot of questions about how the Venin know this. Can they see into the future? A lot of listeners are believing that they can see into the future, that a lot of her dreams are prophecies. I'm going to keep moving on because that's not really the rabbit hole I want to go down right now. But he does also state that he's doing what he promised. He must have promised that he would be the Venin on the inside to destroy the wards. And so this promise must be to the Venin leaders with their unknown way of communicating from outside Navarre to Besgaeth. And I also have to throw in maybe he even promised Daddy Atos, because that's our catch-all for big bad guys here. Again, we have to talk about the communication. We can assume that the Venin are communicating with Violet, and I'll even throw Xaden in there, through their dreams. Is that the same way that they're communicating with Jack? Is there that intrinsic ability, or even a telepathic across long distances, even within the wards? That's definitely a possibility too. We do not know what the Venin are capable of, except that they are capable of a lot of crazy shit. So I'm going to be so excited to learn more about how these lines of communication formed, how they look different from person to person. For instance, with Jack, who's a fellow Venin within the wards, or if it's with Violet, where the Venin comes to her in her dreams and she just thinks that it's dreams, or Xaden, who I'm going to guess knows that the Venin are actually coming to him in his dreams, and he knows that it's not just a bad dream. He knows that they are truly communicating with him and trying to lure him in.
That's what I have to say about that. Really quick moment we want to point out is that Jack fucking Barlow throws out a shield to protect against Xaden's shadows. He's protecting against Xaden's shadows. Xaden is one powerful motherfucking wielder. This is a pretty big moment, even though this is a lesser magic. Yes, shields?
So yes, physical shields like this, as well as sound shields and such, they are lesser magic. But you're right, it does seem to be extra powerful, especially up against Xaden's shadows. I am assuming that Jack recently channeled, whether that is in a dark way from Bade, and that's another reason why her eyes are opaque, or from the source in order to then control her. Even though we still don't get the red eye description from him right now. In fact, I think the only time we ever get that description about Jack is in Fourth Wing when they're on the sparring mat, which I'm assuming he had recently just channeled so that then he can go up against her there.
He was channeling in the moment. That's when his eyes are red.
That's right. He was channeling there in the moment. So yes. So I am assuming, like I said, that he did recently just channel, and therefore that makes him more powerful in the moment.
Well, and also remember that initiates, which is the level of venin that Jack is, at least we can assume, they have an indistinguishable, basically, red rim around their eyes. Like, think Xaden at the very end. But these red rings do come and go as you channel from the source and whatnot. But also, you have to be pretty close to someone, like physically, to see a red rim around their eyes. Now, this is interesting. I've seen a lot of different fan arts describing the red rim. Some of it's like a full-blown, like, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm using this with my eye. If you don't like people touching your eyes, look away for a second. But like, there's like almost like around the skin of the eye. That's where it's red. I've seen it where it's like around the iris itself. I've seen it where it's around the pupil. No matter what, it all looks really fucking cool. I'm so excited to see how that's portrayed in the show. I want to just point out poor fucking Riddick in this moment, because he puts up an ice shield and it burns his hands as Bait is blasting fire at them. However, I also want to point out it is so cool to see his powers in action. He literally puts up a protection against a wall of fucking fire. Like, that is
dragon fire.
That is
like,
huge. Yeah. But element signets are kind of described as like uneventful signets. They're pretty common. This is fucking rad. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, justice for the elemental wielders here, because you got some cool stuff going on.
I will also point out that this is another moment of support for Violet's second signet being amplification, that Riddick was able to do something this impressive because Violet was near him and able to amplify his signet.
Oh, see, I'm going to be such a Lexi in this moment and be like, oh, I want that to be Riddick. Like, I want that to be on Riddick.
That's what I'm saying. But I will also say here, too, just while we're talking about that, quick side note, is that later on, Mira says that she can now create wards when there are not wards that she's within. And Lilith is very surprised. And so I'm willing to bet that she has tested this theory out a few more times since that happened with Dakaris, where she can say with confidence that she is able to do that and protect her mom in that way. It ends up being very ironic that she's not able to protect her mom, but that is for a different podcast episode. So I do think that Mira is able to do that on her own and that she's not only relying on Violet, and she knows that. And then the wards fall. And every time I read that the wards have fallen, I just get chills. I get chills right now. It all starts to make sense. The Venin have been at the borders. They've been waiting for Jack to do his job of deactivating the ward stone. And I wonder if they needed him because of his bond with an easily controllable dragon. And that is why he's like the key here for them. Now the wards are down and they can make their ultimate move towards Bisgaiath.
Yes. Now, when I tell you, I got so pissed off when Jack killed Bade, because I was thinking in my head, I was like, this is why we brought him back, to kill his own fucking dragon and then have him die himself. Because of course I thought he was going to die because his dragon's now dead. How many times have we heard a dragon without its rider is a tragedy, a rider without their dragon is dead? But then it was like, oh no, Jack's turned Venin. And I immediately forgave that whole spiral that I went down and was so much more interested in where he's going in the story. We give Jack fucking Barlow so much shit on this podcast for coming back and whatever. But the truth is, I'm so excited that he's a part of this story in this way, and I'm really curious as to where him and Xaden's relationship specifically is going to go. So I had a very big 180 emotional pivot in like 2 pages.
I'm right there with you. It was such a record scratch moment when we've learned that Jack is Venin. If you've been with us for a while, you know my strong feelings about Jack fucking Barlow. And I had the biggest egg on my face after our Fourth Wing episode 6 when I went on and on about how Jack is dead. We still get lots of messages from people who are like listening to the Fourth Wing episodes and they're like, ha 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 ha. It's like, yeah, that exists on the internet. Womp womp for me. But then in that same segment where I went on my rant, I went even further, just creating a full-blown omelet on my face at this point, saying he most definitely can't be Venin. Like, yeah, not just coming back to life, but can't be a Venin because they are within the wards. And remember, everything that we knew meant that you cannot become a Venin within the wards. We also did not believe that you could become a Venin if you were bonded to a dragon. So all of this to say, and I will say it again because I can never say this enough whenever we talk about Jack fucking Barlow, is that all of you Jack is alive and Venin theorists, you were right. I was wrong. I accept my L. You wear the crown. Like Nicole is saying, as soon as Jack returned to our story way back in chapter 25, that feels like forever ago, I guessed that he had to be brought back for a bigger purpose. I really hoped so. I trusted Rebecca Yarros with her writing style and how she does her stories, that certainly he would become a key factor later on. However, taking down Navarre's wards as an inside Venin and killing his own dragon was not what I had in mind. Oh my gosh. Again, I just love how she uses these plot twists in ways that, yeah, maybe a few people saw them coming, but whoa, then there's something really crazy. This changes everything we know about Venin and the wards. Like I was just saying, it changes everything that we know about dragon bonds as well and how people use magic. The wards, they don't block all Venin power like the dragons and subsequently Navarian leadership want you to think, as Jack says. Even within the wards, Venin can feed from the ground and channel enough to survive. Jack even says enough to fool them mean everybody. I interpret this as finding the balance to channel just enough to not become starved, which I'll have a lot more to say on in our final chapter regarding Xaden, but not channeling too much to where they like level up as a Venin. Remember, the more you channel, the more your eyes get red and then you become, you know, the next rank of Venin there. So you have to find that balance of fooling everyone into thinking you're just a normal person and not channeling too much where you reveal that you are indeed a Venin there. Again, I just like during this whole sequence, it's like, oh my God, how is he not worried that he's about to die? Like he just killed his own dragon. I thought this was just such a fascinating, masterful reveal here, especially for me with harboring all of my feelings about Jack fucking Barlow.
Yes. And then Nolan walks in to this chamber and homeboy takes some L's in this stretch.
The only reason Nolan is still alive is because there is about to be a big battle. But I can imagine how much self-restraint Xaden has to have in this moment because all he wants to do is kill Nolan.
I wish he had. I wish he had. I mean, no, we need a mender in the battle.
I have to wonder if Jack ever did play Nolan, like pretended he was being mended and getting his soul back when he was acting all nice to everyone when he did come back. And
yes.
Nolan is under the Nolan is under the impression that he hasn't completely made up his mind to go villain. Like Nolan knows that it's a possibility. He's kind of like teetering on and he has his good days and then maybe his dark thoughts. And that's why he's begging him to choose better because he naively thinks that there is still a choice to be made for him, as if a dead dragon in the Wardstone chamber where it is now deactivated isn't your first clue that he might have made that choice.
I can't stand Nolan. Like, I cannot stand him. So we do need to talk about Jack's motivation to turn Venin and see if that does give us some clues as to when he turned Venin, because Rebecca Yarros has confirmed that she knows, but we as readers do not know. He says if there was ever a choice to make, he made it the second he saw Violet bond Tairn. Now remember back in Fourth Wing, Jack fucking Barlow basically called shotgun on Tairn during one of Professor Kaori's classes. He saw Tairn as the most powerful dragon to bond. He wanted more power in his greed and decided to take matters in his own hands and literally take it into his own hands from the ground. So he reached for Veninhood. My question is, when he decided to turn Venin, did he have a teacher? Did he figure it out on his own? I'm so fascinated to learn more about this. But we can safely assume that him turning Venin was before him and Violet sparred on the mat and after Violet bonded Tairn at Threshing. Now, Jack fucking Barlow does say, quote, he's coming with a horde of greens. This is when Jack fucking Barlow is talking to Violet and saying, I don't understand why they want you so badly. In my headcanon, this quote unquote he is the Venin that Xaden supposedly kills at the end of this book. I don't think he's actually dead.
No, not at all. Not at all.
If you don't see it, we learned this during Fourth Wing. If you don't see a body, they're not dead.
He is definitely not dead.
But the reason I don't think this he is the sage from Violet's dreams is because he's not in the battle, at least as far as we know at the end of this book. I feel like he would have been very clearly on the page if the sage was in this battle. There is a lot more that we learn from Jack fucking Barlow in this scene, though. But the most troubling is the word we in all of Jack fucking Barlow's statements. He says, quote, while you were busy smuggling weapons out, we were busy smuggling them, Venin, in. This is highly concerning. But also, if he's smuggling them in, that doesn't mean that at least these ones that he's smuggling in are Bezgaeth students. Now, they could be helping Bezgaeth students turn, but smuggling them in means that they are outside of Bezgaeth War College.
So, yes, my understanding here is that the Venin have infiltrated Navarre's military beyond just those at Bezgaeth. Like Jack says, we are among you. If they're smuggling these lures in, that must mean other riders who have graduated, possibly even infantry who returned to Bezgaeth for one reason or another, they are among them. They are Venin and who have graduated and then turned Venin, or who became Venin. You know, maybe they were in second wing. Going back to that. It's been a minute. and they turned Venin while they were at college, and then they graduated and essentially were undercover Venin, so to speak, there. Of course, we have to say this possibility. Daddy Atos could be behind this in some way, although I personally don't think that he is a Venin himself. We talked about that a lot. I do, however, think that he is working with them in some way, shape, or form. Varish is another one who could have been an insider Venin. We've talked a lot about the possibility of him being a Venin. We have a social post that I love how in the comments, everybody has their own opinion, and I absolutely love how we can all interpret things differently from the same text. I'm also going to throw something out here that, Nicole, you're not going to like, but Professor Grady, he just came back from active duty to teach at Bezgaeth.
How dare you come at me?
I know!
How dare you come at him? Oh my God.
But he is a prime example of someone who was in active duty who then comes back and returns to Bezgaeth. And I just gotta say it, Professor Grady, a lot of bad stuff happened after you returned.
No, Professor Grady's great. Minus the poisoning.
Minus the poisoning
and torture.
Well, I'll give him this. He didn't actively do the torturing himself.
No, he just teaches the class about it.
As Jack's breathing becomes labored, like Liam's had after Day's death, I love that tie-in there. It's so heart-wrenching, and it's a good little mirroring there. He reaches for the wall and, he channels. It isn't explicitly said, but this does show that he might have died as a result of his dragon dying, if he didn't then drain power from the source. Channeling from the ground and draining life, it keeps the Venin alive. They are no longer tethered to their dragon's life. They are now tethered to, I'll say like life, like the magic of life. And that, of course, comes at a terrible cost because you're not supposed to do that. And while he is channeling, Dane stops Xaden from killing Jack and uses his memory-stealing ability for good. Huzzah! I have to say, I get a lot of satisfaction seeing this in action when it's not against our favorite character. It's like, yes, I love seeing, it's a really cool signet, and it's just really sucks when it's used on Violet. As Dane retrieves Jack's memories of where the lures are, Jack reaches for his forearms and grabs him right after he channeled.
So my question is Dane okay? Because Dane now has 2 gray handprints on his arm after Jack grabs him after channeling to stop him from getting at his memories. Is this going to mean anything for Dane, or is this going to be a wound that it just heals? Because later Riddick mentions, hey, how's Dane and his Venin injury? And Violet says, quote, "Nothing we can do for him. Not sure if it's because it's an unmendable wound or because Nolan's too exhausted from trying to bring Jack back over and over. Nolan, your priorities. Oh my God." So I guess this will be a book 3 mystery, but also I have to think about gray on, Dane's skin, and silver are 2 fairly similar colors. I also think about gray being associated with Wyvern a lot of the time, but would this be Dane's version of Violet's silver hair?
I had not thought of that, and I absolutely love that little tie-in there. I know we haven't done a lot of deep dive with the theories and Violet's hair and Venin. We've just kind of sprinkled it throughout all of our coverage here. But wow, yes, I definitely see that. Yes.
I love it.
Can we take a moment to note that Xaden doesn't do anything when Jack is draining Dane for a few moments? Violet has to repeat his name in a shout, and Dane is screaming in agony for Xaden to kick into action and knock Jack out with the hilt of his dagger. He's kind of should I let this happen?
He was like, this might take care of my problems for me.
Once Jack is unconscious and Nolan forces the serum down his throat, Xaden cuts away Jack's first wing patch. It's such a small action, but it feels very symbolic that Xaden rips away Jack's placement in the Writer's Quadrant. And I have to wonder if it's foreshadowing for when Xaden also becomes a Venin and feels like he doesn't deserve to be part of this group.
That line of thinking right there, I don't deserve to be part of this group, is why I'm terrified he's going to pull an Edward Cullen and just be like, I'm not good enough for you, so I have to leave. Ugh, God, I hope that doesn't happen. That was a lot to digest in that scene. So let's move out of the Wardstone Chamber and into the battle plan scene. We've learned this quite a number of times in this book, but Lilith says it very directly here. Venin mimic the fighting styles of the people that they're fighting hand to hand.
Which, real quickly, how does she know that?
You just stopped to sneeze. I was about to sneeze and you shocked me so much that I stopped my sneeze.
I mean, she has definitely fought Venin before. Just throwing that out there. Nobody's supposed to know that Venin exists. They've all been supposed to be protecting behind their wards. So even though they know that they exist, they're just supposed to be shielding the secret. Yeah, our girl has definitely fought Venin.
Oh, she also has a dagger that she had like during Fourth Wing, and it was on her desk. So again, we hear this saying over and over again that Venin will mimic the fighting style that you choose in hand-to-hand combat. And I started wondering in this read-through, how do they know how to start mimicking? Is it a certain magic that they possess that they're just like that good at hand-to-hand? Or Xaden also mentions how he knows exactly what people have planned to get the upper hand.
This could potentially, I gotta plug this in again, be linked to how they communicate across long distances with people like Xaden and Violet, or Jack, who, promised he would deactivate the wards, or the others who are smuggling these lures in. Maybe they do communicate through that intensic ability, whether it is into dreams or just, again, like that, like long distance telepathy. I don't know what the right word is for that, but you know what I mean.
Well, and even just on the battlefield, if they're able to see what kind of fighting style an opponent is taking and they're able to mimic it with them, those connections just seem too tight to not be related. You know what I mean?
I absolutely agree with you. Yes.
So let's talk about the battle plan itself. Lilith says that every squad will be assigned a sector of airspace in the college, and they are responsible for the Venin and Wyvern who reach that airspace. And then infantry are going to be covering the ground. Let us remember what happens to the ground people in a Venin fight. They get every essence sucked out of them. So it sucks to be infantry in this fight.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I would much rather be a dragon rider.
Oh, yeah. In this moment, I'd rather be a dragon rider and then a healer. Because then you're just helping in the background.
At this point, I just want to be a scribe who's part of like the evacuation process. That's the Hufflepuff in me. You can go be your Gryffindors. I'm going to just make sure everything's okay. And continuing on with explaining the battle plan, because again, there's so much that happens in these final chapters. So we're really doing our best to walk you all through step by step about what is happening, what was the plan, and so on and so forth. So in addition to each squad being assigned a sector of airspace to monitor it and kill all of the Wyvern and Venin that are in their specific space, each squad is assigned to a graduated, more experienced writer to join them, which I love how Mira respectfully but firmly says she needs to stay with their mom and protect her, while Xaden should go with Violet. Again, it really kind of shows that trust that Mira has in Xaden, and I love their dynamic there where she, as the big sister, trusts that he will protect her little sister so that she can focus on their mom, who Xaden probably would not care as much about protecting. Anyway, their job is to kill the Wyvern, yes, but more importantly, their job is to go after the Venin, because when you kill the Venin, the Wyvern they created die. But remember, only kill a Venin with your buddy. Do not, I repeat, do not go rogue. Buddy system here, folks. I just love that so much. Like, you gotta have the buddy system. And as they wait for the Dark Wielders and their hordes to arrive, the infantry will work on tracking down the lures and destroying them. The less lures, the more chance they have of buying time for the Venin to essentially get lost. Destroying these lures will at least throw off further waves, because yes, the big terrifying army coming at them is only the first wave of bad guys to come and destroy everything that they know and love. While the infantry and riders prepare for battle, the healers are preparing for the casualties and injuries, and the scribes are evacuating the most important texts, which Violet has a little chip on her shoulder, being like, oh, and they'll conveniently forget the ones that need to be burned.
Burn it down. Now, Violet and Xaden's moment, the calm before the storm. This Oh, God, this moment just breaks my heart. It is so, so sad. They're quite literally acting because, I mean, what better information do they have? As if this is their final moments together. And it's fucking heartbreaking. Also, Xaden's saying that if you want to fly away, I will fly with you. The dramatic irony is fucking painful here because, yeah, if they had left, he would not have turned Venin. Now, obviously, if they had left, they would have survivor's guilt and Violet would never be able to live with herself if she left her squad. But damn, if my heart just doesn't crack open the fact that he's like, if you want to go, I will fly with you. Like, blah, that just shows how they know what they're up against is basically a suicide mission.
Yep, exactly. The line where Violet says essentially like they've already lost the battle. They're just still breathing. It was just like, oh, that line really sticks with me. So real quick before we move on to the knock on the door, Violet notes that she didn't have any nightmares last night. And maybe this is a stretch, but I wonder if she didn't because the Venin are heading their way. They're already in flight and they're essentially too busy to invade her dreams right now. It's just a thought as we were talking about how they all communicate with each other earlier. But then there is that knock, knock on the door, as my little daughter, 1-year-old daughter, likes to say, knock, knock. Actually, it was not. It was more of a bang, bang. Anyway, and guess who's there? It's Ree, Brennan, and the rest of their squad. Hey, including Flyers and several first years like Sloan. They're all outside the door. So yay, Brennan showed up to do the decent thing after all. I also have to say, it's got to be terrifying for our Flyer friends to be at Biscayeth, which has always been the heart of enemy territory for them. Yes, they all have way bigger problems now, but this has got to be huge, and I'm just so proud of them for being brave enough to literally go into their enemy territory.
I love that moment where Violet's looking at Kat and Kat's like looking around, basically looking for any interior structural disadvantages. And it's just, it's such a Kat moment. It's so funny.
Then Lilith finally grants our favorite second squad permission to guard the airspace above the Wardstone chamber while Brennan attempts to mend it. Maybe she does eventually cave to this request because Brennan is going to be trying to mend the Wardstone and she wants to make sure that Brennan is protected. It's not necessarily the Wardstone she cares about being protected that they've convinced. It is the fact that her favorite child, who she's already lost, is going to be there. So yes, now they have her approval to guard that space there. If Brennan can somehow mend the Wardstone, they just need to hold out long enough for Coda to arrive and be able to breathe fire on it. Because remember, Taryn is not able to do this because he already breathed fire on the Orishan Wardstone. And even though they think Andarna is a black dragon, she does not have the ability to breathe fire. Yet.
I love that moment where Lilith is just like staring at Brennan and she's like, yeah, granted, whatever. I said this in Battle Brief. I'm pretty sure she's only 10% of like mentally there for what she's actually saying yes to.
Or like I just said, it's that her reasoning for saying yes is different than why they're asking her for it.
Well, and I do have to wonder, what was their goal beforehand? It was to hold out until General Melgren came, but then there's a whole second way. So then it's still like they're still in full-blown battle mode. Like there was no way to win this battle other than murder all of the Venin who come across their border or make them retreat. So the fact that they weren't even thinking about how to mend a Wardstone, which would basically cancel all of the Venin and their powers and the Wyvern as a result on impact, like it, these writers.
Wait, but remember, their original first goal was to protect the Wardstone to make sure that the wards did not fail.
Well, yeah, and then Jack fucking Barlow decided to go full-blown Elmo fire meme and just totally did everything that you shouldn't have done. Before we move into our foreshadowing section, I want to do our quick gravity count. So we have this moment in the sparring gym where during their promises of basically for better or for worse, we will be together, Violet says, quote, "You're my gravity. Nothing in my world works without you." And Xaden retorts back with a smile. He says, "Gravity?" She says, quote, "The only force we can never escape." So we have a gravity count of 7 for this book so far. I also get real nervous about that whole "nothing in my world works without you," and that feels very ominous foreshadowing-y.
Speaking of foreshadowing there, Nicole, it is time to move into our next section here and talk about all of the other foreshadowing moments that we did not already mention in our Signet Power part. Nicole, kick it off for us.
This is more of a possible foreshadowing moment. It's mentioned that Kat can make a tracking rune that can track someone else's rune, and this is like a super impressive bit of magic. So if the Wyvern have runes inside them, what if she can start tracking Wyverns, basically making like a Wyvern alarm system? I just think that would be so cool if she's able to do that.
And especially because my first thought would be, well, they probably need to have access to that Wyvern rune in the first place to be able to like pick up on that tracking. But guess what? They have a whole bunch of dead Wyvern who are within those borders. So they could retrieve those runes that are still active and use those. Ooh, I like that idea.
Next up, Andarna getting all fussy about how the dragons only answer to the eldest in their den. She says this to Taryn and Violet, and both obviously immediately think Coda, but the irony that Andarna is actually the eldest of her own den. Later in that same scene, she even says, quote, "Perhaps I will be the eldest of my own den." I don't know about this whole future tense thing here, Andarna. You are the eldest of your own den, right? Because unless there's some kind of dragons that are just chilling on like the Isle Kingdoms, for instance, that are a part of the seventh den, she is the only one of her kind.
And then just a few lines later, there's another description about how her scales seem to be a different color. And folks, it's all right there on the page. I love these rereads where it's just like jumping out at us. And especially as we get to the big climax, it's just like, I love it.
How I did not figure this out just baffles me as I was reading this for the first time.
Xaden gives another speech about how only Violet has the power to destroy him. And yep, he turns Venin to save her very, very, very soon. We're getting to that point there, folks. Andarna states that she will be where she is needed. And she says that on multiple occasions in this stretch of chapters. It makes me wonder if she knows that she will truly be needed for the Wardstone. Or is she being an adolescent who just wants to help and she's just being a little bit stubborn about it? In any case, she certainly does show up where and when she's needed.
No kidding. Violet, seeing that this Wardstone in Basgiath is on fire with black flames, unlike Eratia, which is no flames, she's about to, in a few chapters, figure out exactly why it makes this iron flame. Hey, isn't that the name of this book? And then last but not least, Xaden saying, quote, "Jack turned Venin. Somehow he managed it within the wards." True. And while he does not turn Venin in the wards, he will be living as a Venin within the wards in just a matter of pages. I'm so excited for this today. Let us step into the archives, where each episode Lexi educates us all on a prominent world-building topic from this stretch of chapters.
Today's archives topic is actually an extension/addendum of Fourth Wing's episode 8 archives, now with the Iron Flame knowledge we have. And we still have a lot more to learn in coming books, but for now, let's make sure we're all caught up to speed on everything we know about Venin. Keyword being, this is all we know, meaning facts about Venin. We're not going to do a lot of speculating and theories in here because then we would just be talking forever and ever and ever. So Venin, also known as Dark Wielders, are magically corrupted people. They draw power from the ground, aka channel from the source. This ability to wield magic is in stark contrast to the typical way that one channels power from bonding with a dragon or griffin. This unnatural tap into power has a terrible cost though. You become corrupted and you lose your soul. Nature likes all things in balance, and Venin take power that they're not supposed to. So, in turn, they lose their humanity. Let's talk about the Venin hierarchy. A key piece of information we get in Iron Flame about Venin are the Venin ranks and their hierarchy based on their age, experience, and amount of power that they've channeled. So, first we have initiates, who are the lowest level of Venin. Their eyes may have reddish rings depending on how often or how recently they channeled power. This is Jack's Venin rank, as well as Xaden's by the end of the book, and I'm going to guess it is the primary rank for Venin that are hiding in plain sight within Navarre's wards. Next, we have Asems, whose eyes fluctuate in varying degrees of red and the veins distend when riled. This is like the Venin student Violet fought on the back of Taryn in Fourth Wing. Then, of course, we have Sages. We've talked a lot about Sages throughout our books here. Sages are responsible for initiates, and while the book doesn't say, I'm going to assume Asems as well because these lower level Venin are students and Sages are their teachers. Sages' eyes are permanently red and their veins perpetually distend toward their temples and expand with age. We also know that there are multiple sages. Think of them as the main Venin who are in leadership, but they're not like the head honcho. Which brings us to the fourth and final Venin ranking, the Maven, aka the General, aka the Big Cheese. Not much is known about Maven because one has never been captured. We just know that they're in charge. I'm assuming that there are several Maven and not just one, because in Xaden's POV chapter 66, when he faces off with one, the Maven says, I am a general. Not the general, but a general. While we don't know exactly how Venin age, we do get hints from the higher ranked ones that they can be centuries old. So the laws of aging, they don't work the same way once when you turn Venin. What are Venin capable of? A whole lot of scary shit, that's what. They gather more power by channeling from the source. But what does that mean? They literally pull power from the earth and they suck the life out of the ground. The grass turns brown, flowers lose their color, stone color even loses it, becomes a beige instead. The energy from life itself is drawn into the Venin for them to then powerfully channel back out. Magic that Venin wield includes, but is certainly not limited to, balls of blue flame that they can throw like daggers. They can also teleport. They can create a wave of death from where they stand. That's one of the scariest things here. It's a dead zone where anyone who is within that zone there shrivels up, dies, and then their power is now the Venin's. If they grab hold of you, like the Venin does to the poor guard in Corden, they can essentially suck the life out of you. Some Venin, specifically sages and maven, they use staffs to wield magic, and that magic includes defying gravity by lifting people into the air. We learn from Xaden's POV chapter that after he turns Venin, his Signet power is heightened. Now he's referring specifically that his shadow wielding is even stronger. It's unknown to be determined about his intrinsic ability, but this is definitely something to keep an eye out for as we head into book 3. One of the epigraphs state that Venin are believed to have a stronger sense, like farsight. However, I don't know if that means a heightened senses in general, or like a singular sense is stronger, or if this is referring to senses as in powers. So that was a little bit confusing, but the bottom line is Venin get heightened senses, heightened sense of power with their signets, and they're really scary. Think of power as an addiction for Venin. Once they channel from the source, there's no turning back, and they begin to crave more power. The Signet blocking serum seems to keep the Venin under control though, based off of what we know with Jack Barlow. But on that note, there is no cure after you turn Venin. That we know of. Come on, we need to cure you, Xaden! In addition to wielding dark magic, Venin are insanely good at hand-to-hand combat, as Nicole was saying earlier on. They can quickly adapt to an opponent's fighting style, and Venin move fast. They use swords and then poisoned green-tipped serrated daggers that we learn are deadly. Ha! Go figure, another deadly weapon. But wounds from these daggers and poison can be mended, as we see what Brennan does with Violet at the end of Fourth Wing. Dark wielders also create Wyvern, which are controlled and tethered to life by these Venin who create it. They share a collective conscience, so anything the Wyvern sees, the Venin does as well. Interestingly, Wyvern have extremely complex runes inside of them, so we can assume Venin create the Wyvern using this rune magic. And Darna also notes that Wyverns smell like stolen magic. Very interesting note there. There are several types of Wyvern, including one that produces blue fire, a faster one that breathes green fire, and then another one that breathes cherry red fire. And so I'm assuming that all of these, I'll say colors, are based off of just the fire that they breathe, and that all of the Wyvern are still gray. Venin who are bonded with dragons can also control them, like what we see that Jack does with Bade, and they do not die if their bonded dragon dies, because remember, they are tethered to life no longer by their dragon, but by the power that they channel from the earth. Last thing in this little section here is that Venin can be lured with runes, as we talked a lot about here. They feel this pull, and the rune is like a tracker for them. This was present at Resin, and it is of course what Jack uses here to bring them directly to Biscayeth after he deactivates the Wardstone. So what about some of the Venin weaknesses? They've got to have some weaknesses, right? Venin are extremely hard to kill. They are immune to Dragonfire, except apparently in Darna's. We're going to talk about that in the next few episodes. And the only weapon that can kill them is alloy. That's why making alloy-infused weapons are absolutely essential to the continent's fight. Violet's lightning wielding can also kill Venin, and when a Venin dies, all the Wyvern it creates also dies. We also know that a weapon killed off the Venin 600 years ago during the Great War. But that's all we know. Don't get me started on that whole thing again. Venin can also be inhibited when they are forced to stay airborne, which restricts them from being able to channel to the source. Air wielders are key here, or runes like what we see in the chest in Corden. If they've already drained something, they cannot drain that same thing again. For example, Takaris' stones that were mined from Venin-drained land couldn't be used as a power source again. I love how Violet noted that. Navarre's wards certainly limit Venin's power, but they can still function and even turn within the wards. Again, everything we thought we knew is not true anymore with that. And Rebecca Yarros has confirmed we'll learn more about the ins and outs of how Venin work within the wards in the next book. But for now, we know that you can turn Venin within the wards, and you can still channel from the source, which is how you turn, of course, in the first place. But yes, the wards do largely weaken Venin and dark wielding abilities. Last thing here to note about Venin weaknesses, like I mentioned a little while ago, Bisgayeth has developed a serum that they use on Venin like Jack to block them from channeling power to the source. Let's discuss the history of Venin and the lead up to their position of strength in Iron Flame. Until now, Navarre believed that Venin were mythological creatures found only in fables, but obviously that is not the case at all, and Poromil has been fighting them for the better part of 50 years, and their power and strength and numbers have been growing over these past few years in particular. Folklore tells the origin story of 3 brothers, one who bonded with a dragon, one who bonded with a griffin, and the third brother who became so jealous that he drew directly from the source, losing his soul and waging war on the other 2. But let's take it back 650 years ago to the Great War. General Daramore and his forces fought against the First Six and their allies when the general left the Barrens and invaded the rest of the continent. General Daramore left the Barrens in ruin, so we are going to make an assumption that he led an army of Venin and is central to their origin story. Again, that is an assumption there. He and the Venin caused the Barrens to turn into a lifeless region on the continent, since the Venin sucked all the magic out of the lands. Yes, Nicole and I also do speculate that General Daramore is a maven, or I'll say is the top maven. However, the general and his armies were indeed defeated. And once again, all we know is that the Venin were killed off by a secret weapon that we know nothing about. Moving on. The end of the Great War led to the unification of Navarre. Remember that Navarre gave Poromil 1 year to migrate across its borders before they put the wards up to keep the Venin and everyone else out. 200 years later, Navarre history erased Venin, so its citizens truly do not believe that they are real, or that they ever existed, or that they are anything more than in fables, if they've even heard the fables at all. But Poromil sure knows that they're real. God, do they know that they're real. They've been fighting the Dark Wielders for years. The Venin have been increasing in power and numbers, attacking Poromil villages and cities. It was only within the last 50 years that Poromil realized that they were not only coming from the Barrens anymore. Venin recruit wannabe flyers who failed at bonding with a griffin. Again, I think that Jack is another great example here about possibly being recruited because he wanted more power, and he was so angry that he didn't get all of the power that he wanted from bonding with a dragon like Terran. The Venin overtake Zolia in early fall, which is the 3rd largest city and the 2nd most populous in Braverick, Poromil. The Battle of Zolia lasted 2 whole days, and 10,000 Poromilians lost their lives. That is so sad. The fall of Zolia was a huge loss for Poromil and a tremendous gain for Venin. Zolia was home to Cliffsbane Academy, where the Griffin Flyers trained and where most of the literature on Venin was kept. Luckily, Poromil was able to smuggle some of that literature out, but gosh, I can only imagine all that they lost there when the Venin took over. Along with Zolia, the Venin are strategically invading Poromil and heading toward Navarre's borders. Venin have been most active in invading Braverick, which makes sense because that's right up against the Barrens' border the most. But the Venin have even started going as far north as Signisen, and they are also present at the coast along the southern province, Krovla. More recently, the Venin are heading up the Stonewater River, which intersects with Samara at Navarre's border. Again, I'm really asking anybody out there to give me a map like what we have in Battle Brief, the most updated one with all the red dots and everything. So the Venin have concentrating numbers here by the Navarrian border that intersects with the Stonewater River, branching out and poised for that targeted attack as soon as the wards fall. Whew! I'm sure I didn't even get everything about the Venin, but that's at least a good Spark Notes version for you all.
You're amazing. Let us close out this episode by taking flight with our favorite moments. I'm going to start off with the moment where Violet says to Mira, quote, "I want to be you when I grow up." Every little sibling knows this feeling. It's so true. But also, man, oh man, does that feel ominous about Mira's fate. Don't like this.
I was going to come in and say that same line because it's such a sibling line to say, but I did not think about that Mira foreshadowing part. That's just so ominous. You're right.
Oh.
Another favorite part of mine is when Zane is playing with words, saying he doesn't wield emotions, and if Mira wants influential mind work, to go find a flyer. Well played, Xaden. Well played. Because, hey, you are the ultimate mind wielder. Okay, so call me crazy, but I weirdly liked the Melgren descriptions and dialogue. Like, I love his character. Of course, I don't like him, but I love his character and how he's portrayed. For instance, how he wears rage like it's part of his uniform. And I just have such a clear mental image there. Of course, Nicole, you were mentioning Daddy Atos and how there are some parallels with how unhinged, but it's almost like he is a composed, angry man, and then there's Daddy Atos who is just like, kind of thing. And you also learn so much about Melgren from this Athbane exchange. Quote, when you abandon ship in the middle of a hurricane, you save those you can in the dinghy and then cut the hands off anyone else who tries to climb aboard so they don't pull you under. Mira fires back that he's a callous asshole. And Melgren says, thank you, which I just get such a chuckle out of.
I love this line right here. Quote, the atmosphere has changed from war college to straight up war. This tells you everything you need to know about the energy of Ryerson House. I love it.
They're probably still taking stupid physics class, which, by the way, I understand why they are taking physics class. And there are some very interesting tie-ins with gravity. I'm just somebody who doesn't like science, so let me just have fun with that. I love the sequence of Violet's inner monologue as they realize the Venin are going after Basgiath and they're deciding whether to go or not. This is one of those moments where you need to make a big life decision right fucking now, and it's so true to form for her character. She hates that this decision means risking everyone she loves and their lives. But if they stay, they are no better than their Navarian enemy. So, of course, they have to go. It's a very Harry Potter-esque mindset that she has here.
Totally. I love when Xaden winks at Violet in their, they're waiting for the battle briefing to start. And she feels like she just got transported back to last year. I totally see that moment so vividly. And then Riddick saying that with Violet and Xaden, maybe they'll last an hour. Sawyer then says, my money's on 2. But Imogen chimes in with anything less than 4 hours is unacceptable. I miss Imogen.
Do too. I love that so much. And this is just showing how not brave I am. But if we're all going to die, I'd rather last just 1 hour and just get it over with than spread it all out over 4 hours and just really suffer.
Wow.
Guys, make me a flyer. Just make me a griffin flyer. I am not cut out to be a dragon rider. I admit it. Violet's signature mantra is, I will not die today. It breaks my heart how she's like, well, I know I can't say the same about tomorrow. She is facing death and she knows it and she accepts that, but she can still say that mantra one more time. All right, folks, that is it for today. Next episode, we will be covering chapters 61 through 64. Nothing happens in those chapters, right? Nothing at all.
Oh, yeah. Nothing at all. Oh, my God. It's going to be episode 8 of Fourth Wing all over again. Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, a.k.a. our sanity manager. We freaking love you.
If you want more content, more from Nicole and I, and more recommendations from this community on small businesses and fantasy books to read, please be sure to sign up for our newsletter. It is launching this week, and we are so excited for it. If you want to go even further with getting more content and community, it means everything to us for all of you who join our Patreon. You can join our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. And of course, if you're not following us on Instagram and/or TikTok, what are you doing? Give us a follow at Fantasy Fangirls Pod.
Please do not forget to also rate and review the show. It takes literally 5 seconds to press that 5-star button on whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, or the like and subscribe button on YouTube. And as always, please share this episode with your fellow Iron Flame friends. We are getting to the very last bit of this book, and if you, like us on our first read, were like, what the fuck is this ending? You can share this episode with your friends who also read Fourth Wing and have very similar experiences, and then you all get the clarity together.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Can we do that one more time?
Yes,
I
of course.
dropped the word fantasy, which is kind of important. So do that again. Athbane.
You were asking the wrong person.
Word. All right. Third. Bleh. But this giant organ. Oh my God. So that they can get. Bleh.
Which is monument. Oh my God.
On because here all these beyond let's talk the real to some Daddy A's well that choice shunted
shunt. That's not a word.
And then bleh.
I have to pee so badly.
In true Nicole fashion, I am starving. And darn it, bleh, bleh. Where Lexi, Riddick, I almost said Chicago. Wow, I need to go eat. I'm like delusional now.